Chapter 519. Crazy. They're all crazy. The Abyss soldiers were scared out of their wits, and in their eyes, Hanjin had also gone crazy. A single person had chased after an army of more than 100,000 for more than 40 kilometers. Who knew how many Abyss soldiers wanted to turn back and question Hanjin? Was it worth it? When Hanjin felt that more than half of his vital energy and divine sense had been consumed, he finally stopped. At this time, he had left behind a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Although Hanjin's blade aura was peerlessly powerful, the amount of damage it could cause was limited. At least, it couldn't be compared to a large-scale Dao technique. However, Hanjin's countless blade lights had accumulated a huge amount of damage. The corpses that could be seen everywhere in the 40-kilometer-long wilderness were the most convincing proof. The soldiers of Esnearly City didn't participate in the chase. It wasn't that they didn't want to, but rather that they didn't dare. If they were to mix with the Abyss soldiers, who could guarantee that the terrifying demigod rank expert wouldn't scatter blade lights at them? Kemarak was thoroughly convinced. He originally had some hope that if Hanjin's side and the Abyss army fought until both sides suffered, then the Freedom Federation would have the confidence to speak. However, the facts clearly told him that even without the Abyss army, just Hanjin's group alone was enough to turn Esnearly City into ruins. After standing blankly for a long time, Kemarak squeezed out a sentence. Lord Raphael, is he really a Grand Magus? Major Domo Gale and the others looked at each other in dismay. No one could answer Kemarak's question. Even Sunir, who knew Hanjin's core secret, was stumped by this question. No matter what, this was the first victory the Freedom Federation had obtained since the invasion of the Abyss race. Moreover, it was a true victory. Although this was achieved with the help of reinforcements, it didn't affect the people's joy in the slightest. Esnearly City immediately became lively. If Bauer's request for reinforcements had given the people of the Freedom Federation a glimmer of hope, then the appearance of Hanjin's group had brought them the dawn of victory. The news of the Abyssal army being repelled spread to every corner of the city as if it had grown wings. In particular, the news of Hanjin chasing the army of tens of thousands of people for dozens of kilometers was spread by everyone. That evening, Kemarak invited Hanjin and the others to a banquet in his mansion. At the same time, he also laid out some details on the table. This was Kemarak expressing his sincerity to Hanjin. He had no choice but to do this because there were still many cities in the Freedom Federation that were under threat. Hanjin did not have much interest in these matters. Since Guevara was not around, the negotiations naturally fell to Major Domo Gale and Zhenglin. Major Domo Gale was a little better. He had long been accustomed to Hanjin's behavior of not caring about political affairs. Zhenglin, on the other hand, was a little surprised. How could such an important matter be handled by a person who had just joined the Holy Crown City group? But no matter whether Hanjin truly trusted him or just made a gesture, Zhenglin had to admit that this feeling was quite good. Unconsciously, Zhenglin compared Hanjin and Nicolai in his heart. He came to the conclusion that Hanjin was more daring. At least in the matter of expanding the territory, Nicolai would never allow anyone to interfere, let alone entrust someone with full authority. When this scene fell into Kemarak's eyes, he didn't feel good about it. Could it be that the other party didn't place the Freedom Federation in his eyes? However, recalling Hanjin's courage during the day, Kemarak was a little discouraged. He did have the capital to do so. In the end, it was still a matter of strength. Just like the fallen angel Catherine, although she had no soldiers under her command, she was still one of the 3 giants of the Abyss. Before the negotiations began, both sides thought that these minor issues would quickly reach a consensus. Unexpectedly, only a few minutes later, the 2 sides had several disputes. There was no other reason. The system of the Freedom Federation was completely different from that of other places. The supreme power was jointly controlled by large and small nobles. The current governor, Kemarak, was elected by the upper house. His term was 7 years. When the term was up, he had to abdicate. He also had no right to appoint his own successor. If he made a big mistake during his term, The upper house even had the right to impeach him immediately. Take the agreement between Kemorak and Hanjin as an example. If it did not get the support of the upper house, the agreement would have no effect. It was reasonable to say that in the negotiations, Majordomo Gale and Zhenglin should play the role of good cop and bad cop. However, both of them were angry. What kind of joke was this? Could it be that they wanted Hanjin to stand in the upper house and be questioned by all the representatives? Especially Zhenglin. Although he was a victim of the imperial system, his attitude was even more intense than Majordomo Gale's. The upper house and the lower house had to be dissolved, and the Freedom Federation would be divided into 3 territories. Kemorak would be the first lord of Esnierly City. Of course, Kemorak would use the most solemn method to accept Hanjin's edict. Kemorak did not necessarily dislike Zhenglin's proposal. The governor's term was only 7 years. Although after becoming a lord, he would only have a third of his original territory, but his authority would be much greater than before. Moreover, it was for life. The premise was that he did not anger Hanjin. If he managed it well, he could even pass on his position to his descendants. Compared to this, what was a governor? However, Kemorak was very clear about the inside story of the upper house. He did not dare to act rashly. He could only patiently explain to Majordomo Gale and Zhenglin the powerful relationship between the two, as well as the various conflicts that might arise. Unfortunately, Majordomo Gale and Zhenglin simply did not listen. Rebound? Kill whoever rebounded, or drive them out of Esnierly City and leave them to fend for themselves. Kemorak felt a headache coming on. It was like a chicken talking to a duck, and his position was very awkward. If he continued to speak for the nobles, he would leave a bad impression on Hanjin, which would be very unfavorable for him in the future. If he drew closer to the Holy Crown City group, there would be no need for the Abyss Army to attack Esnierly City. Even the entire Freedom Federation would be in danger of completely collapsing. At the end of the discussion, Majordomo Gale became impatient. The arrival of the God of War had solved Esnierly City's urgent problem. What qualifications did Kemorak have to bargain? He winked at Zhenglin and said coldly, "There's no point in continuing the discussion, but I want to warn you here. When we left the God of War, our Lord told us that the reinforcements from the Abyss World would appear soon." "What did you say? Reinforcements from the Abyss World?" Kemorak was shocked. Seeing Majordomo Gale's indifferent expression, he felt even more miserable. God had mercy on him. He absolutely supported Zhenglin's proposal. Who would want to be a lord? The problem was that he didn't want to cause internal strife, especially now. Did our Lord say when the reinforcements from the Abyss World would arrive? Snarly asked timidly. The negotiation had reached a deadlock. He shouldn't have asked, but it was related to the safety of the city and even the entire Freedom Federation. He could only ask with a straight face. Maybe a few days later, maybe tomorrow, or maybe now. Majordomo Gale said lightly. After that, he and Zhenglin walked to the door of the conference room one after another. Kemoratsi and Snarly looked at each other in dismay. Fortunately, today was only an internal, small-scale negotiation. If the negotiation had been held in the House of Lords, the result would have been predictable. A fight would have broken out. Kemorak had experienced the sharp words of the representatives of the House of Lords and their ability to nitpick. Majordomo Gale and Zhenglin were here to negotiate. They represented the dignity of Hanjin, so there was no way they could tolerate this. They might even kill on the spot. "My lord, are they deliberately trying to scare us?" Snarly whispered. "Do you think it's necessary?" Kemorak slumped in his chair weakly. Prophets were used by Hanjin to deceive people a long time ago. He didn't have the ability to predict the future. The only reason he could predict the arrival of reinforcements was because of Leonardo. Leonardo left as soon as he said so. He didn't care about the lives of the Abyss warriors. Even if he was afraid of Hanjin's magic array, he wouldn't have been scared to such an extent. After thinking about it, there was only one reasonable explanation. Those Abyss warriors were just cannon fodder. It would be better if they didn't die, but it didn't matter if they died. When Hanjin told Majordomo Gale his judgment, his expression was very solemn. He could vaguely see Donald's overall plan. Occupying the entire continent wasn't Donald's only goal. Donald also wanted to use this war to reshuffle the various races of the Abyss. However, the war still had to be fought. It was impossible to conquer the Freedom Federation with just a few powerhouses. They still needed a large number of troops. Leonardo didn't care about the lives of those Abyss warriors, which meant that he already had reinforcements. Moreover, Leonardo had confessed that he came out to test Han Jin's strength. After the test, it was impossible for there to be no follow-up. This also meant that after Han Jin defeated the fallen angel Catherine, Donald had immediately received the news through some unknown method. Then, he made the corresponding arrangements to deal with Han Jin. Asterisk, 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 when Majordomo Gale and Green Zingling left the conference room, Leonardo was slowly walking up a small hill. He looked ahead and saw a huge ring of fire more than 10 miles away. The ring of fire was more than 30 meters tall and was completely composed of dark red flames. As the breeze blew, the ring of fire constantly changed and twisted. Inside the ring of fire were countless black waves that looked very viscous. If Leonardo was replaced by any other warrior of the Freedom Federation, even Senator Camerazzi, they would feel cold all over and might even collapse on the spot. Hell's Gate. The Abyss race had actually built a Hell's Gate in the Freedom Federation. Near the Hell's Gate, there were countless monkey-like monsters. Those who had traveled through the Abyss world would immediately recognize them. These were the only long-range troops of the Abyss demon vassal race, the Flame Gog. Outside the Hell's Gate were hordes of canine magic beasts. Their bodies were much thicker than ordinary dogs, and when they stood up, they were even taller than human warriors. Some had 2 heads, while others had 3. These magic beasts were densely packed together, covering the mountains and plains. There were at least several 100,000 of them. Just looking at them would make one's scalp go numb. 30 miles to the east of the Hell's Gate was a city that originally housed over 200,000 people, but now it had become a silent ghost town. It was different from the battlefield ruins that Han Jin and the others had seen. Not to mention corpses, not even a single bone could be found in this city. Even if a light breeze blew into the city, it would suddenly become deathly silent. Occasionally, a few canine magic beasts would stealthily walk on the streets before disappearing into the dark corners. These magic beasts were the infamous hellhounds. Although the hellhounds' killing power couldn't be considered very high, and they couldn't pose a threat to a true expert, these magic beasts had their own advantages. The hellhound's vitality was extremely tenacious, and they also had a terrifying reproductive ability. Every year, the hellhound would give birth to pups. A litter of pups could have almost 10 pups. In other words, a pair of hellhounds, after 3 or 4 years of breeding, would evolve into a large pack. Moreover, the hellhounds would eat anything, even bones, insects, and ants. If they were really hungry, they would even eat their own companions. Those who survived through elimination were naturally the strongest of the hellhounds. What was even more frightening was that the hellhounds had relatively advanced intelligence, and they could fight in groups like an army. During the First World War, a demon commander once joked that if there weren't any professionals on the continent, there wouldn't be a need for them to launch an attack. They would only need to send out 10,000 hellhounds to wipe out all the creatures on the surface, including magic beasts. Leonardo let out a sigh of relief. At this time, 3 hellhounds chasing each other passed by him. Leonardo waved his hand, and the 3 hellhounds seemed to understand Leonardo's intention. They immediately changed directions and ran in front of Leonardo. They prostrated themselves on the ground and looked at Leonardo with their blood-red eyes. Leonardo bent down and patted the head of one of the hellhounds. Suddenly, he exerted force and broke the hellhound's head. The white bones pierced through the neck, and blood flowed out. The hellhound was in so much pain that its whole body trembled. The remaining 2 heads even opened their mouths and bit each other, as if this could lessen their pain. However, they didn't dare to attack the instigator, even though Leonardo was right beside them. Leonardo lowered his head and pressed it against the hellhound's wound. He sucked a long mouthful of blood, then stood up and kicked the hellhound to the side. He slightly opened his mouth, and the blood in his mouth dripped down. In the blink of an eye, his brown chest was dyed red. Leonardo slightly closed his eyes, and a mist rose from his body. The dripping blood quickly evaporated, and in a moment, it turned into black and red blood stains. Leonardo lowered his head and looked at his work. He seemed very satisfied, and then he slowly walked towards the Hell's Gate. Beside the Hell's Gate, there were a few tall warriors. They were very similar to Wei Pu and his brothers, ugly and ferocious. The only difference was that the demon horns on the Wei Pu brothers' foreheads grew backwards, while the demon horns on their heads stretched straight towards the sky, like two arrogant and unruly sharp swords. Leonardo slowly walked towards the warriors. The warriors exchanged glances, and one of them, a one-eyed warrior, chuckled and said, "Leonardo, what happened to you?" "I met Raphael," Leonardo said softly. "Raphael? He's here?" The only warrior sitting on a stone pillar suddenly asked, "Are you sure you didn't see wrong?" "Apart from him, who else can hurt me?" Leonardo said. The other warriors exchanged glances again, but the one-eyed warrior didn't bother to hide his sneer. "But the mission Father gave me, I already—" Leonardo's expression was calm, but before he could finish, he was rudely interrupted by the one-eyed warrior. "Shut up, Father? You bastard! You think you're worthy?" The one-eyed warrior extended his index finger, rudely poking Leonardo's forehead. "You think you're worthy? You think you're worthy?" Every time he shouted, he would tap Leonardo's forehead, and Leonardo would be forced to retreat again and again. "Richard, what are you doing? Let him finish." The warrior sitting on the stone pillar frowned. The one-eyed warrior, named Richard, coldly snorted. The remaining one opened his eyes wide, staring at Leonardo. However, he still obeyed the warrior's order and obediently shut his mouth. "I've already completed the mission Father gave me." Leonardo's expression didn't change. Raphael's battle strength can't be considered very high. As long as we don't give him a chance to release a magic formation, we can eliminate him. "Why would Raphael appear in the Freedom Federation?" another warrior asked. "I don't know," Leonardo replied. "That's good. We don't have to go to the Holy Crown City. Let's settle this once and for all." The warrior sitting on the stone pillar slowly said, "Leonardo, does that Raphael really have the same teleportation ability as us?" "Yes." Leonardo nodded. "Hey, I say, that Raphael isn't a bastard, is he?" The one-eyed warrior named Richard shouted. Leonardo slowly lowered his head. The repeated bastard was challenging his tolerance limit. However, it was different now. He didn't have the highest command of the army, and the right of explanation belonged to the other party. If there was a conflict, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. "Well, Leonardo, go rest. Take care of your wounds," the warrior sitting on the stone pillar softly said. Leonardo bowed and slowly retreated. Seeing Leonardo's figure disappear, the warrior sitting on the stone pillar turned his gaze to Richard. "Richard, be careful in the future. At this time, don't affect our unity." "Unity?" Richard couldn't bear it anymore. He pointed at his blind eye and shouted, "What unity can I have with him? Damn it, I want to kill him right now." At that time, it was you who proposed a duel with him. The warrior sitting on the stone pillar slowly said, Richard was speechless for a moment, but then he shouted in an even louder voice, "Brother, don't tell me you don't want to kill him. As long as he is alive, he will take away Father's favor. Moreover, you will always be the second forever." To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 520. Rest for a while. Han Jin's figure stopped. His upper body was naked, and he was already sweating profusely. Even his eyebrows were covered in bean-sized beads of sweat. "Yes, my lord," Adolf responded. Han Jin sat down and panted heavily. Not only was he exhausted, but the brilliance emitted by the two angels behind him also seemed to be a little sluggish. Only Adolf still looked refreshed. Han Jin originally wanted Adolf to be his sparring partner, but no matter how he asked, Adolf did not dare to use his full strength. Han Jin felt uncomfortable, so he simply let the two angels and Adolf attack him together. After a long, fierce battle, the one who really exerted his strength would naturally be tired. As for Adolf, his expression was the best proof of his laziness. "Master, that guy Hogan has been wandering around outside. It seems like he wants to see you," Harley suddenly said. "Let him in." As he spoke, he lazily laid down on the bed and leisurely looked at the unique starry sky that only existed in this magic laboratory. His mind had already flown to another place. This kind of sparring did not seem to have much meaning. It was always missing something. He could not find a feeling of being lifeless and indestructible like when he was chasing after the Abyss warriors. It seemed that he should still go to the battlefield to improve his progress. But what exactly was missing? Here, he would be worried about whether he would really hurt Adolf and the two angels. On the battlefield, he could release his full strength without any scruples. Just this difference alone caused such a huge contrast. Just as Han Jin was lost in thought, Hogan hurriedly walked in. "Master, I have already counted. There are only 3 fire attribute dragon crystals left. There are still more than 600 grade 10 fire attribute magic crystals left. Master, do you want to move them all?" Han Jin looked at his left palm. The word tribulation on his palm was emitting a faint red light. He calculated in his heart for a moment and said, "There is no need for dragon crystals. Zhenglin, Spencer, and the others are all fire grand magi. Perhaps dragon crystals will be more useful to them. Bring me 300 grade 10 fire attribute magic crystals." "Only 300? Can you?" Hogan asked. Because all the magic crystals on the God of War were allocated by Hogan, he was very clear about the amount of magic crystals Han Jin consumed. Sometimes he even suspected that his master ate magic crystals as food. Unfortunately, there was no one to be the judge. Otherwise, they would definitely tell Hogan, "Congratulations, you got it right enough." Han Jin nodded his head. The talisman of the heavenly apocalyptic fire was almost complete. After absorbing another 300 class 10 fire-type magic crystals, he could create another 2 or 3 red lotus fires. Understood. Hogan turned around and hurried out. Han Jin sighed softly. Back then, when he schemed against Dragon City and Dragon Realm, the huge harvest had made him go wild with joy. However, as the bottomless pit that was him grew bigger and bigger, those dragon crystals were obviously not enough. "Why can't I see the black dragon?" Han Jin whispered. "Black dragon?" Adolf was stunned. "Yes." Han Jin smiled. "I really hope to see them flying above Esnearly City. I think you want the fire-type dragon crystals, don't you?" Adolf also laughed. No one had ever dared to talk about the powerful dragons in such a tone. Han Jin was simply treating them as food, just like a wolf teasing a sheep for its delicious food. Adolf was greatly comforted by Han Jin's arrogance. "It doesn't matter if they don't come. In fact, we can get a large number of high-quality magic crystals of fire element from other sources." Adolf said. "Other sources? You have a way?" Han Jin asked. "According to your estimation, the Flame Tyrant is about to arrive." Adolf said. "The Flame Tyrant is the ruler of the evil fire spirits. The evil fire spirits are different from other life forms. They were born in the ancient lava formed thousands of years ago. After a long period of evolution, they have developed a high level of intelligence. In a sense, they are immortal. As long as they are nourished by the lava, their fire of life will not be extinguished." "They have fire-type magic crystals?" Han Jin asked. "Even the little fire spirits that were just born in the lava have extremely pure, high-quality fire-type magic crystals." Adolf nodded. "However, the Flame Tyrant is only ranked below the 3 giants in the Abyss. He's not easy to deal with. But his strength is not as good as the fallen Angel Catherine's after all, isn't it?" Han Jin smiled. What he was implying was that he had already dealt with those who were harder to deal with. "Yes." Adolf smiled until the wrinkles on his face stretched out. Of course, he could understand what Han Jin meant. However, after a moment, his expression changed again. Every time he thought of the battle between Han Jin and the fallen angel Catherine, he would feel extremely conflicted. Why? Why didn't he participate? In fact, all the powerhouses who saw Han Jin as a threat did not realize that Han Jin had a terrifying characteristic. The larger the scale of the battle, the more bountiful Han Jin's gains would be, and the faster his strength would improve. He would also be able to create more and more terrifying talismans. The only way was for all the high-end forces who hated Han Jin to gather together and attack Han Jin to completely destroy Han Jin. Unfortunately, whether it was Donald, Nicolay, Black Dragon King Valentine, or Great Lich Denver, none of them had raised Han Jin to such heights. At this moment, Hogan walked in again. "Master, I forgot to tell you that Majordomo Gale and Lord Zhonglin seem to be looking for you. How many days have I been here?" Han Jin asked. He was either engaged in a fierce battle with Adolf or was adjusting his breath, completely ignoring the time. "Almost 3 days," Hogan replied. "All right, go out and tell them they'll be right there," Han Jin said. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. It was already late at night, and Esnally City fell into silence. However, the lights in Kemmerake's mansion were still not extinguished. "My dear Lord Kemmerake, what are you worried about? You should know that what they want is a complete freedom federation, not a piece of land where riots occur every day," an old man wearing a black robe said unhurriedly. Kemmerake stared blankly at the old man for a while, then forced a smile. "Do you really think we have any leeway to bargain? Why would you think that?" The old man said with a smile. "Negotiation is an incomparably wonderful art. Yes, he has great power, but sometimes power doesn't equal authority. What do you want to do?" Kemmerake forced himself to ask. He really couldn't understand where this old man's courage came from. The scene he saw through his clairvoyant eyes had already made him unable to resist Han Jin. If Kemmerake had absolute authority, he would have already offered the Freedom Federation to him. "We can accept him as the master of the Freedom Federation, and his will be thoroughly carried out. There is no need to doubt this." After a pause, the old man said in a firm tone, "However, there are some things that we must have the right to speak. This is what we deserve." Kemmerake sighed. "With all due respect, you are playing with fire." The old man shrugged his shoulders noncommittally. "Perhaps, but so what? Our tradition won't change because of a war. You should be very clear about this. Have you not thought about the consequences? If they abandon the Freedom Federation, who will deal with the Abyss Army?" Kemmerake frowned, a trace of disgust welling up in his heart. He certainly knew what the old man meant by tradition. "You are too pessimistic." The old man's eyes revealed a bit of craftiness. "That young king won't do that. The territory of the Freedom Federation is much larger than that of the Holy Crown City. Perhaps you don't know that king very well." Kemmerake looked at the old man in front of him, suddenly hoping that Han Jin would go on a killing spree and kill all these damn counselors. That way, the world would be peaceful. "Oh." The old man raised his eyebrows in interest. "What do you want to say? Don't you know what happened during the day? A single person was able to defeat an army of tens of thousands. What reason do you have to think that he will compromise with you?" "Compromise? You are wrong," the old man leisurely said. "How would I dare to think like that? It's just that there are many things in the Freedom Federation that are more suitable for us to handle. Regarding this point, you should have a deep understanding, right?" Kemmerake's eyes flashed with a trace of anger. When he had just become a senator, he had thought of doing something bold and decisive. But the facts told him that no matter what he wanted to do, as long as it touched the interests of these counselors, it would be impossible to effectively implement it. "Since this is the case, Mr. Honduras, please negotiate with the young king on my behalf. I believe that with your wisdom, you will be able to persuade him." Kemmerake said with a smile that was not a smile. In his heart, he planned to go to the god of war first thing in the morning and make things clear. It was not that Kemmerake didn't want to cooperate, but compared to these counselors, his words were simply insignificant. "As you wish." The old man stood up gracefully and bowed. The two smiled at the same time. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. When Han Jin walked up to the deck, he saw Majordomo Gale and Jellin discussing something. "How is it?" Hanjin sat down beside them. Kemmerake's attitude is very firm. I really don't know where he gets his confidence from. Raphael, if you don't object, we might as well. Majordomo Gale's eyelids drooped. Find a thorough solution. There hasn't been any progress in the past 3 days. Hanjin asked. If there had been progress, I wouldn't be so angry, Majordomo Gale said. Hanjin thought for a moment. Is it that serious? I'm not unfamiliar with their situation. That senator called Kemmerake shouldn't have too much power. Jella nodded. Indeed, most of the power is still in the hands of the counselors. But what does this have to do with us? We are the ones who saved the Freedom Federation. They should show the sincerity they deserve. Let's gather those counselors together. Let me see if their bones are really that hard, Majordomo Gale said. His expression was very calm, as if he was talking about an unimportant matter. That's a solution, but it's better to solve it quickly. We can't waste all our time on them. Jellen's agreement surprised Hanjin. It wasn't surprising that Majordomo Gale would make such a decision. After being an assassin for so many years, who knew how many lives he had taken? But in Hanjin's impression, Jellin had always been a kind and taciturn elder. It was somewhat inconceivable that he would agree to such a bloodthirsty proposal. Hanjin had forgotten that Jellin was the former president of the Majestic Light Empire's Magic Guild. If he didn't have the courage to kill, he wouldn't have been able to sit in that position. Hanjin only hesitated for a moment before making a decision. Do as you see fit. Mr. Jellin is right. We don't have much time. We really can't waste it on them. Although Hanjin didn't intend to solve the problem by killing, he didn't care about the counselor's noble status. There was no harm in killing a few more of these people who only cared about their own interests in the face of a great disaster. Jellin smiled. Just as he was about to say something, he heard a mountain soldier report that Kemmerake had asked for an audience. Hanjin nodded and motioned for the mountain soldier to bring him up. When Kemmerake walked onto the deck, he saw Hanjin and the others sitting there chatting and laughing. He hurriedly walked over and respectfully bowed. Then he said the excuse he had thought of. The general idea was that the continuous battle had made him physically and mentally exhausted. In addition, he was old and his body couldn't support himself. He begged Hanjin to allow him to rest for a few days. As for the negotiations, he would let the counselors take over. Even if Hanjin didn't understand politics, he could still hear the insincerity in Kemmerake's words. Not to mention, a person who was in high spirits a few days ago was complaining that he couldn't do what he wanted. Furthermore, he ran onto the god of war in the middle of the night. There must be something fishy going on. He simply handed over the power to negotiate. Maybe it was to protect himself, or maybe he couldn't bear to see a bloody scene. However, this was also a good thing. Kemmerake's words had at least indirectly expressed his attitude towards Hanjin, and Hanjin admired this person. From Bauer's words, Hanjin had learned that Kemmerake had a very high reputation in the Freedom Federation and was one of the few people who was willing to do practical things. It doesn't matter. You can rest. Hanjin smiled and agreed to Kemmerake's request. We were just discussing when to meet with those honorable counselors. You came at the right time. Help us make an appointment. Kemmerake hurriedly agreed. As he walked towards the city, he thought to himself, fortunately, I made the decision in advance. It seems that the young king has already set his sights on those counselors. Those short-sighted fellows, I'm afraid they can't imagine what they are about to face. Looking up at the dark clouds in the sky, Kemmerake sighed in his heart. The sky of the Freedom Federation was about to change. Chapter 5:21. The black waves that were surging within the Hell's Gate suddenly changed. Not only did they roll more violently, but the ring of fire at the edge also burned hotter. A moment later, 2 fiery red horns poked out from the gate, followed by the head, and then the entire body. Gradually, accompanied by the thick smell of blood, a blood-red monster that was as tall as 2 people crawled out. Pieces of angular muscles were exposed on the surface of its body, and there were countless bulging veins on its body. It looked very ferocious. As soon as the monster stepped on the ground, it roared majestically at the sky. The deafening sound spread far and wide in the open field. The one-eyed warrior named Richard stepped forward and kicked the monster, causing it to tumble over. He shouted, "You damn things, you're too slow." The monster immediately lost its momentum. It did not dare to show the slightest dissatisfaction and obediently hid to the side. The warrior sitting on the stone block glared at Richard, then got up and walked to the monster's side. He said a few words, and the monster immediately became excited. Its four claws dug restlessly into the ground, and its red eyes emitted a bloodthirsty light. At this time, one monster after another emerged from the Hell's Gate. The monster that came out first roared a few times in a low voice and rushed out. The rest of the monsters immediately followed closely behind it. As if there was no end to them, more and more monsters appeared. In the end, the group of monsters was stretched into a long dragon. However, their numbers were still increasing. Countless feet stomped on the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. The monsters ran excitedly, as if there was delicious food waiting for them in front of them. "Richard, can't you be nicer to them?" the warrior in the lead said with some dissatisfaction. Richard sneered, "Brother, these longhorn demons are just a bunch of cannon fodder. Whether I treat them well or not, it doesn't make a difference, right?" The warrior in the lead stared at Richard for a while, then said calmly, "Remember, this is not your war alone." After that, the warrior in the lead turned and walked away. About 7 to 8 hours later, when the last evil spirit leaped out of the gates of hell, the black waves in the gates of hell finally stopped rolling and began to flow slowly and peacefully. As the long-horned evil demons left, Flaming Gog and the hellhounds gathered together again, surrounding the Hell's Gate so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Meanwhile, the few warriors were still guarding the Hell's Gate, as if they were waiting for something. After a while, Richard frowned. "That bastard Loncole does everything slowly. It's already been 5 days. Why isn't he here yet?" At this time, Leonardo walked over from afar. He first bowed to the warriors, then smiled. "Leonardo, how are your injuries?" The warrior in the lead asked softly. "I'm fine. My recovery ability has always been very strong," Leonardo said. "That's good." The warrior in the lead smiled. "The situation now is very serious. If we want to eliminate Raphael, we need to fight together. I brought you here because I want to bring you back in one piece." Leonardo's eyes flashed. He obviously knew what the warrior meant. By bringing them here, he was already calling himself the leader. "Leonardo, you still haven't made an evaluation of Raphael." Richard interrupted. "It seems that Father giving you the Hell's purple garden flower was a big mistake. You can't blame me." Leonardo smiled bitterly. "Raphael's source of power is very mysterious. He can clearly control the elements and release powerful destructive power, but he doesn't cause any elemental fluctuations. I have no way of evaluating such a powerhouse. So, just admit that you're useless." Richard laughed strangely. Leonardo kept his mouth shut. He knew that the other party was still hostile to him, and he didn't want to argue with him. It was meaningless. Only children would argue with each other. Actions were always better than words. Either don't do it, or do it. You have to be ruthless. Richard snorted when he saw that Leonardo was ignoring him. "Big brother, I don't think there's a need for us to wait here for longer. Can't we kill that Raphael if we join hands? Why should we give him the credit? Damn it, every time I see Lonker's smug face, I feel disgusted. What nonsense are you talking about? If Raphael was so easy to kill, he would have been killed long ago. It wouldn't be our turn." The warrior in the lead then turned to Leonardo. "Leonardo, what do you think?" "My opinion? What opinion?" Leonardo was stunned. "Idiot," Richard scolded. "My big brother is asking you, if we work together, what are the chances of killing that Raphael?" Leonardo's face showed a look of realization, but he was cursing in his heart. "Idiot, always pretending to be mature and calm. What's the point of pretending? Aren't you showing your true colors now? You want this credit more than anyone else to confirm your position as the successor. This isn't appropriate?" Leonardo was a little hesitant. "If we work together, we should have some advantage, but Who can guarantee that Raphael won't be able to release the magic circle? You know, even the fallen angel Catherine. You think we don't know anything? Richard sneered. The fallen angel Catherine was defeated by the angels summoned by Raphael. You? Leonardo was shocked and tongue-tied. He then smiled bitterly. Even so, what if Raphael summons that terrifying angel again? Leonardo, you still want to play tricks with us? Richard laughed. Other than the ruling angel Alpha, which angel is stronger than Catherine? Although we don't know why Catherine was injured, Raphael's trap is definitely targeted at Catherine. It won't work on us at all. Leonardo was speechless. He slowly lowered his head. When his gaze fell on his feet, a sinister smile appeared in his eyes. You know, very good, very good. I was worried that the information about the hell purple flower wouldn't reach you in time. After a while, Leonardo slowly raised his head and said in a firm tone, I still object. Raphael's strength is far beyond your imagination. I've already suffered a lot, and I have more right to speak than you. You're really fickle. Richard sneered. A few days ago, you said that as long as Raphael isn't able to release the magic circle, he won't be very strong. Don't forget, Raphael has the same teleportation ability as us. Do you really think you can stop him from releasing magic? Leonardo said. Forget it. The leading warrior waved his hand dispiritedly. Leonardo, you can leave first. Leonardo glanced at the warrior, bowed, then turned around and walked away. Big brother, what are you afraid of? After Leonardo left, Richard shouted, We have an uncountable number of troops, enough to crush any city. No matter how strong that Raphael is, he won't be able to stop us. Leonardo isn't lying. Another warrior slowly said, I've come into contact with those minotaurs and medusas. Raphael is just one person with a strange weapon. He chased them for several dozen miles and killed countless abyss warriors. The minotaur's morale is a bit better, but the medusas are already scared out of their wits. So what? I can also do it, Richard called out. He wasn't bragging. In fact, this was the reason why the demons were the #1 race in the abyss. How can you be sure that Leonardo isn't lying? Another warrior revealed a faint smile. You've also investigated? No, the warrior said with a smile, but I know that Leonardo's injuries are fake. What do you mean? The leading warrior was stunned. Do you still remember that day? The warrior said, when Leonardo appeared in front of us, his chest and mouth were covered in blood. That wasn't his blood, but rather the blood of a hell dog. Are you sure? Why didn't you say anything that day? The leading warrior quickly asked. I can guarantee it with my life, the warrior said. I didn't say anything back then because I wanted to see what Leonardo was up to. You can't blame me. If you want to blame someone, blame Richard. What's wrong with me? Richard was confused. Your personality is too violent and you can't hide your thoughts. If I told you, you would have already questioned Leonardo. Richard couldn't be bothered to argue with the other party. He turned to the leading warrior and said, Brother, do you still not understand? Leonardo isn't injured, so why would he do this? He's worried that we'll make a big contribution. The eyes of the warrior in the lead kept darting about. Sometimes he would look to the left, sometimes he would look to the right. But no matter where he looked, there would always be groups of Chaos Abyss warriors jumping into his vision. Countless hellhounds, flame gogs, and longhorn demons had already covered the entire field. Asterisk, 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 the second negotiation between Majordomo Gale, Zunglin, and the representatives of the House of Lords began. The representatives were all from the upper class, and they were all gentlemen among nobles. Naturally, they wouldn't make any mistakes in their etiquette. Everyone's smile was impeccable and full of sincerity. Gale and Zunglin also had smiles on their faces, but when the representatives all sat down, Gale was the first to speak. Gentlemen, I want to make one thing clear. You only have two choices. One is to agree, and the other is to disagree. The representatives looked at each other, not understanding the meaning of Gale's words. Was this still a negotiation? A few of the older ones were already frowning and muttering discontentedly. Gale didn't care about what they thought. He continued to speak and listed out his conditions. When Gale was done, the expressions of all the representatives turned ugly. They couldn't be blamed. If they really did as Gale said, it meant that they would lose most of the power they currently had. How is it? Gentlemen, have you made your decision? Gale asked with a smile after waiting for a moment. No one responded to his words. The gazes of the representatives toward Gale were filled with undisguised anger. Those who agree, please sit next to me. Gale continued calmly, as if he didn't notice the strange gazes on him. Hee Gale, why would anyone sit next to you if you ask like that? Zhenlin couldn't help but laugh. All right, since you say so, I'll change my method, Gale said with a smile. May I ask, is there anyone who disagrees? The representatives began to stir. This was too childish. Even if they were just putting on an act, they wouldn't reveal their bone-deep contempt when they held a meeting with the citizens of Esnearly City. Ahem! An old man broke the awkwardness. Honorable Lord Gale, we've all come with sincerity. I hope you can be more cautious. After all, this is not a small matter. Gale nodded and agreed. You should be more cautious. Look, I'm asking very seriously. Gentlemen, do you agree or not? A young representative couldn't help but stand up from his seat. I don't agree. If that's the case, I'd rather die. Gale stroked his chin and looked at him for a while. He suddenly sneered. You want to die? That's easy. The Abyssal Army is just outside. You could go find them. I believe they'll fulfill your wish. The young representative's face turned red. He dared to stand up and talk back to Gale, but he didn't dare to face the ferocious Abyssal race. He could only stammer and say, hasn't the Abyssal Army been defeated? You also know that they've been defeated? Gale sneered. Then, may I ask, who defeated them? The young representative's face turned even redder. He stammered. Although they were defeated by you, you can't go too far. Perhaps he knew that he was in the wrong, so the young representative's voice became softer and softer. Am I going too far? Gale said calmly. I don't think I forced you to agree. You can totally refuse. The more Gale said this, the more uneasy the representatives felt. They looked at each other, but no one spoke. Gentlemen, haven't you thought about it yet? Gale knocked on the table impatiently. My time is limited. When Gale opened his mouth to speak, Honduras felt that something was wrong. The other party's attitude didn't seem like they were here to negotiate at all. Looking at the aggressive attitude and harsh conditions, it seemed like the other party was deliberately trying to break up the negotiation. So what was their purpose? Honduras thought hard. Although he still couldn't figure it out, Gale's bad attitude made him even more certain of his guess. Honduras' heart skipped a beat, and a terrifying thought popped up in his mind. Could it be that the other party wanted to kill all of them? The more Honduras thought about it, the more he felt that the possibility was very high. Perhaps he really shouldn't have snatched the negotiation from Kemerake. With the consul around, there would at least be some leeway. The other representatives also felt that the atmosphere was a little strange, but when they saw Honduras frowning and not speaking, they didn't dare to make a sound. In particular, the young representative who stood out sadly found that none of his companions stood out to support him. He had no choice but to sit back in his seat awkwardly. Not speaking, Gale looked at them one by one, but none of them were willing to look him in the eye. He sighed helplessly. In that case, I'll take it that you don't agree. At this point, Gale and Zhenlin exchanged glances. Honduras could clearly see a hint of joy in their eyes. At this moment, a mountain warrior hurriedly ran up and whispered something in Gale and Zhenlin's ears. Gale's expression changed immediately. He glanced at the representatives coldly, then stood up and walked to the cabin. I advise you to make a choice quickly, or else. Huh. Zhenlin also stood up and left after leaving the sentence. The other members of the parliament looked at each other and felt a chill in their hearts. Master, Major Domo Gale is looking for you. When Harley floated into the room, Han Jin was staring blankly at the Lion King's shield in front of him. No matter how he probed with his divine sense, he couldn't find the secret that Catherine had mentioned. Oh, let him in. Han Jin stopped thinking about it. Since he couldn't find it, he just put it aside for now. This kind of thing couldn't be rushed. After Gale and Zhenlin came in, They didn't exchange pleasantries with Han Jin and went straight to the point. Raphael, you're right. They do have reinforcements. The flame tyrant is here? Han Jin's spirits were lifted. It was as if he could already see countless high-purity fire magic crystals rolling towards them. That's not it. Major Domo Gale was startled by Han Jin's tone. He couldn't understand why Han Jin was so excited. But it's already very troublesome. This time, there are flame jeg, longhorn demons, and hellhounds. Is the situation very serious? Han Jin noticed Gale's expression and became serious. It's more than just very serious. Major Domo Gale smiled bitterly. It should be very serious, especially with their numbers. Adding the Abyss warriors from a few days ago, the enemy we're facing is almost close to 1 million. 1 million was not a small number. Even Han Jin felt a little dizzy when he heard it. 1 million people. If each of them threw a stone, they could probably drown Esnali City. It's not because of me, is it? Han Jin said suspiciously. Donald didn't have any reason to put so many troops here. How did they come here from the Great Rift Valley? Why didn't they send troops to attack the Holy Crown City? The Holy Crown City is very peaceful. The elves didn't find anything unusual. Major Domo Gale said, if they had heard that 1 million troops were coming to attack the Holy Crown City, Han Jin might have jumped up immediately, and Major Domo Gale and the others wouldn't have been so relaxed. But after all, they were in a strange city, so they didn't have any feelings. Not to mention that before they set out, they had already made a detailed plan. If the god of war was in danger, they would immediately retreat. There was no need to sacrifice themselves for a strange city. That's strange. I'm also very strange. It's impossible to get so many people to the ground without dozens of days of arrangement. Major Domo Gale said. Besides, even if Donald really wanted to deal with you, he should at least send the Flame Tyrant. Without that kind of person, let alone 1 million people, even 10 million people can't stop you. But why do I still feel that something is wrong? Han Jin said while thinking. Millions of troops are here, but the Flame Tyrant still hasn't appeared. What is he waiting for? Raphael, I feel that you want to see the Flame Tyrant very much. Gale asked in surprise. I don't have a choice. Han Jin sighed. The magic crystals are running out. I can only hope that the Flame Tyrant can bring me a surprise. Gale couldn't help but laugh. Listening to Han Jin's tone, he didn't care about the Flame Tyrant at all. After all, the Flame Tyrant was second only to the 3 giants. If these words came from someone else's mouth, Gale would only think that the person was overestimating himself. But Han Jin was different. No matter how powerful the Flame Tyrant was, it couldn't be more powerful than the fallen angel. How far is it from us? Han Jin asked. It will be here by dusk at the latest. Should we prepare first? Yes, I'll go now. Han Jin and Gale walked out the door. By the way, how's the negotiation going? Those people are so cowardly. I only scare them a little, and they didn't dare to say anything. Gale seemed to be still brooding over the counselor's cowardice. Isn't that good? When dusk comes, I hope they still have the courage to remain silent. That way, they won't have the chance to speak for the rest of their lives. We can save some energy, too, Han Jin said with a smile. That's true. Major Domo Gale smiled as well. I can't even be bothered to kill those useless people. As soon as they walked out of the room, they bumped into Zhenglin and Adolf. It seemed that Adolf already knew that the Abyss army was coming in large numbers. There was a hint of excitement on his wrinkled, old face. Sir, Adolf bowed meticulously before straightening his back and looking at Han Jin. Even Gale and Zhenglin, who were standing to the side, could see the desire in his eyes clearly. Haha, don't worry. No matter how many people there are, they're just small fries. I care about the big guys. Han Jin looked at Adolf helplessly. Why did this old man become so excited when he heard that there was going to be a war? He didn't know where his endless energy came from. Are you talking about the Flame Tyrant? Adolf's expression changed slightly. No. Han Jin shook his head. I'm talking about the demon from that day. I have a feeling that he hasn't gone far. Han Jin's greatest reliance was the earth-shrinking spell and earth melt. However, Earthmeld was used for escaping, while Earth Shrinking Spell was the best weapon for hunting down enemies. The appearance of Leonardo, who also had the ability to teleport, made Hanjin feel uncomfortable. At the mention of demons, Adolf's expression turned serious. No matter what profession they were, they would have a headache if they encountered an enemy that could appear anywhere at any time. Other than Hanjin, no one else could do anything to Leonardo. But it's okay. That guy's attack power isn't that great. He was lucky last time and got away. Hanjin still felt a little regretful that he couldn't kill Leonardo. Chapter 5:23. The first wave of the Abyss army was less than a kilometer away from Esnearly City. However, far away, countless Abyss soldiers were still pouring out from the mountains and the horizon. It was as if there was no end to them. Seeing this scene, the expressions of everyone on the city wall changed. Dozens of days ago, when Esnearly City was under attack, the soldiers in the city were still fighting bravely. However, at this moment, their fighting spirit seemed to have collapsed and disappeared. Esnearly City would definitely not be able to withstand the attack of so many Abyss soldiers. Resistance was meaningless. Kalmorazzi, where is Lord Raphael? Honduras asked in a trembling voice. Kalmorazzi glanced back and did not speak. The god of war was still hovering above the city center square. It seemed that it had no intention of moving. Snarly, you stay here in command. Kalmorazzi, let's go visit Lord Raphael together. Hurry. Honduras turned around and walked down the city wall. Mr. President, visiting Lord Raphael now is just asking to be humiliated, Kalmorazzi sneered. Then when do you want to go? Honduras asked strenuously. He had once told Kalmorazzi that although Raphael had great power, sometimes power did not equate to authority. However, if he could use such a tone to teach Kalmorazzi a lesson, there had to be a condition that his life could be guaranteed. Now, he was no longer in a mood to talk nonsense. After we defeat the Abyss Army's attack, Kalmorazzi did not hide his contempt at all. Also, Mr. President, are you planning to hide on the god of war and avoid this battle? Let me tell you, this is impossible. Lord Raphael will not let you on the ship. Honduras's face turned green and white. He knew that Kalmorazzi was purposely mocking him. Defeat the Abyss Army's attack. What a joke with what? As for running to the god of war to avoid the battle, this was downright slander. His entire family was in Esnearly City. What was the point of an old man like him living? But he wasn't in the mood to bicker with Kemmeridge. He only gave Kemmeridge a deep look. Seeing that Kemmeridge still didn't move, a look of disappointment appeared on his face. He turned around and continued to walk down the city walls. If Kalmorazzi had been willing to go with him, he would have had a better chance of persuading Raphael. He would have had more room to maneuver because Kalmorazzi and Raphael were very close. At least, Kalmorazzi had more influence than he did in Honduras. Unfortunately, Kalmorazzi refused him. Under the protection of more than 10 knights, Honduras's carriage sped towards the city center. He wasn't a professional, and as an ordinary person, he was able to control the power of the Freedom Federation. This was something that Honduras had always been proud of. However, when faced with a true life and death situation, he realized just how weak he was. Suddenly, a deafening roar came from behind, and the whole city shook violently. The horse pulling the carriage was frightened, and it no longer listened to the coachman's shouts. It rushed to the side and hit a courtyard gate. Honduras was dizzy from a fall in the carriage. He forced himself to sit up, lifted the curtain, and looked back. Tens of thousands of fireballs arced through the air and slammed into Esnearly City's magic array. The magic array's light screen twisted crazily. At this moment, another loud bang rang out, and the earth trembled again. Honduras was caught off guard, and his chin smashed into the car window frame. Blood immediately gushed out of the wound, and a deep trench appeared on his body. Honduras didn't care about wiping the blood off his face. He screamed at the top of his lungs, "Go! Go!" In a siege battle, the flame gods were the most terrifying long-range troops among the abyssal races. They were born with the ability to release large fireballs. The records of the First World War had clearly pointed out this point. No matter how strong the magic array was, it couldn't withstand the collective attack of the flame gogs. Although in terms of strategy and tactics, Honduras was useless and only relied on trickery to maintain his position. He knew how terrifying the flame gogs were. It wouldn't take long for the flame gogs to destroy all the defenses of Esnearly City with their large fireballs. When the anxious Honduras climbed onto the god of war, he saw an unbelievable scene. The atmosphere on the ship was very relaxed, and Hanjin was sitting at the table, eating his dinner calmly while chatting and laughing with the two beautiful women beside him. Honduras had a lot to say, but when he saw this scene, he couldn't help but be stunned. His lips trembled, and the words he had thought of were forgotten. Why is the honorable president here? Asking for help? Zengling saw Honduras and laughed softly. You know to come to us when you're fighting for your life, but when it's time to split the loot, you're trying to kick us away. Major Domo Gale sneered. Honorable President, do you think we're all fools? You should go. We've decided to leave Esnearly City, Zengling said. By the way, what did you say during the negotiation last time? Is this your fine tradition? All right, I admit that I've been convinced by you. So, I wish you to continue the fine tradition of the Freedom Federation. Honduras was ridiculed until his face turned pale. The violent explosions behind him were stimulating his defenses. Finally, Honduras couldn't control himself anymore. He roared and staggered toward Hanjin. Then, he knelt on the deck and cried, Sir, save us, save us. Hanjin was still leisurely enjoying his dinner, and Sunir and Yelena ignored Honduras. Sir, you have to think twice, Zengling said. We've already been fooled once. We can't trust them again. Mr. Zengling, you mean? Hanjin said with a smile. It's not impossible for us to help, but the honorable representatives of the House of Representatives will have to take the lead. Otherwise, it'll be too unfair for us, Zengling sneered. Honduras had been in the House of Representatives for decades. Of course, he could see through this little trick. However, he had no right to refuse. Moreover, the representatives of the House of Representatives had already sowed the seeds of evil in the previous negotiation. Now, he could only look at Hanjin with pleading eyes. Only Hanjin could reject this terrible suggestion. Then we'll do as you say. Hanjin's words sent Honduras into the abyss of despair. I heard that more than half of the armed forces of the Freedom Federation are in the hands of the representatives of the House of Representatives. This is your city. If you only want to preserve your strength, what right do you have to ask others to contribute? Mr. Honduras, am I right? Sir, this Esnearly is already your city. Honduras cried out in grief. Is that so? Why didn't I feel it? Hanjin said calmly. Hogan, send Mr. Honduras off the ship. Yes, master. Hogan walked over with a sinister smile. He grabbed Honduras's shoulder and dragged him to the side of the ship. Sir, sir, Honduras kept shouting, but no one paid him any attention. Even the few guards who had boarded the god of war could only watch as their president was dragged away. Hogan threw Honduras to a Titan without hesitation. The Titan wrapped a rope around Honduras's body and then pushed him off the side of the ship. Sir, Honduras let out a terrified cry. Seeing that Honduras was about to fall to the ground, the Titan grabbed the rope. A few guards hurriedly gathered, untied the rope, and brought their president to the ground. Honduras, who had just bungee jumped, was pale and couldn't even walk properly. After the remaining guards were chased away from the god of war, Green regained his composure. Sir, we didn't find any evil eyes or Medusas, only a large group of Minotaurs. It should be because their morale hasn't recovered yet. Sir, you scared them. No evil eyes? So I can join the battle too? Yelena said with a smile. The evil eyes' individual attack power was not as sharp as Medusa's, nor did they have the elemental damage of the flame gidge. However, in a large-scale battle, the evil eyes were the most terrifying snipers. As long as a large group of evil eyes participated, even the powerful dragons wouldn't dare to fly freely. Otherwise, they would definitely fall under the collective attack of the evil eyes. The magic circle of Esnerly City can only hold on for 10 minutes at most. Dominique, who was watching the battle from the side of the ship, suddenly said. Explosions sounded one after another. Since the start of the battle, the magic light curtain of Esnerly City had not calmed down. It was constantly twisting, and the degree of twisting was very large, as if it would completely collapse in the next moment. I hope the honorable president can make a wise decision. Otherwise, they have only themselves to blame. Major Domo Gale said coldly. At this moment of life and death, the restraint of the Senate had reached the lowest point because they couldn't guarantee the safety of Esnerly City. No one wanted to die. If anyone wanted to stop them from grasping the hope of survival, they would be the public enemy of everyone. Hearing the request of the Holy Crown City Group, several guards spread the news from 1 to 10, 10 to 100. Hearing the news, the soldiers became excited and the uproar quickly spread throughout the city. After a while, some soldiers spontaneously gathered together and tried to attack the mansions of the representatives of the Senate. The spontaneous behavior soon evolved into an organized action. The soldiers didn't want to hurt anyone. They just wanted to push the families of the representatives to the front line. More and more big fireballs were flying in the air. Hundreds of thousands of flame gidges gathered near the north city of Esnerly City, desperately releasing attacks. The technique of releasing big fireballs by flame gidges was different from that of traditional magicians. The big fireballs released by magicians flew in a straight line, and the attack range was only about 100 or 200 meters. However, flame gidges threw the big fireballs with their arms. They didn't care about the accuracy, but only wanted to achieve the effect of bombardment. Finally, more than a dozen wizard towers dimmed one after another, and the light curtain of the magic circle covering the whole city also disappeared. Big fireballs fell like raindrops in the city, and flames rose into the sky. On and behind the city wall, 7,000 or 8,000 lizard warriors who were releasing arrows were swallowed by the fire in the blink of an eye. Immediately after, countless abyss warriors rushed up the city walls. The city walls that were more than 10 meters tall were nothing to the professionals, and the longhorn demons all had tyrannical strength. With the momentum of their charge, they could easily jump up the city walls. The hellhounds relied on their sharp claws to climb up the city walls like a swarm of ants. The battle formation formed by the flame gogs stopped shooting and quickly gathered below the city walls. Then, they began to attack again. Their mission was to continue shooting and open up a path for the Abyss Warriors. Mr. Zingline, Mr. Spinoza, you two will be in charge of commanding the God of War. Han Jean stood up and said, Harley, you will control the God of War. Mr. Adolf, I will leave the front to you. Yelena, you be careful. Raphael, don't worry. Seeing that Han Jean allowed her to participate in the battle, Yelena showed an excited expression. In just a short time, countless longhorn demons and minotaurs had stepped over the city wall, and the Abyss warriors in the distance were still rushing forward. As for how many soldiers the Abyss race had sent, it was impossible to calculate in detail. The first to launch a counterattack was Yelena. With the help of Baby's extreme speed, she easily bypassed the front battlefield that Adolf was in charge of and entered the battle formation formed by the Abyss warriors from the flank. The dim sky suddenly turned bright red, and then huge lightning pillars fell from the sky. Every lightning pillar would explode when it hit the ground, and flames would soar into the sky. Finally, it formed an incomparably powerful shockwave filled with flames, and everything within a few dozen meters was swept away. Baby was very smart. After only one practice, it had mastered this tactic. It flapped its wings happily, sometimes straight forward, sometimes to the east, and sometimes to the west. It tried its best to let the pillars of lightning released by Yelena fall everywhere. In order to avoid repeated attacks, the lethality of Yelena's 10-grid thunder descent had reached its peak. In the flames that soared into the sky, the Abyss warriors were either blown away on the spot or swallowed by the flames. The flame goblins had a strong resistance against fire elements, but they couldn't resist the nirvana flame that splashed everywhere, nor could they resist the sweeping shockwave. They fell down in large numbers. Adolf's task was to block the enemies in the front, while Yelena's task was to do as much damage as possible and reduce the pressure on Adolf. Hanjin had already used Earthmeld to sneak behind the Abyss Warriors. The Abyss Warriors were in chaos under the bombardment of lightning. If it was an ordinary 10-grid thunder descent, the lethality would not be so terrifying, but Yelena had released fire lightning. Even the tyrannical minotaurs couldn't withstand the burning of the Nirvana flame, let alone the more fragile longhorn demons. As for the even more fragile hellhounds, they would let out shrill cries as soon as they came into contact with the flames. Many of the flame gogs changed their target, and large fireballs rose from the ground like birds returning to the forest, shooting towards Bao Bao. Although their accuracy was lacking, they had the advantage in numbers. Tens of thousands of large fireballs formed a giant net that covered the sky and covered the earth. Baby let out a high-pitched cry, flapped its wings a few times, and shot diagonally into the sky. The immortal bird's full speed was far faster than the large fireballs. Even if the large fireballs were about to hit it, it still had time to change its direction. In an instant, Baby escaped the attack range of the large fireballs. It turned again and quickly dived toward the ground. Yelena's 10-grid thunder descent was still bombarding the ground. Tens of thousands of large fireballs reached their highest point and fell powerlessly to the ground. Countless Abyss Warriors were instantly blown up into a frenzy. Although this was only an adjective, dogs did indeed exist, and they were indeed jumping about in a frenzy. The sky darkened, and the lightning disappeared. The Abyss Warriors had just breathed a sigh of relief when Yelena's magic staff pointed to the sky again. The sky turned red again. Even Hanjin had the resolve to give the position of the god of war's top fighter to Yelena. If the Abyss Warriors thought that they could withstand Yelena's attack, they were dreaming. Following closely behind Yelena was the god of war. Hogan was instructing the mages to adjust the magic crystal cannons. However, the god of war maintained a certain altitude. Bolts of lightning once again rained down from the sky. Kyle, Honduras, and the others who saw this scene through their X-ray eyes were all dumbfounded. Was it her? The girl who always seemed to be smiling and sticking to Hanjin had such terrifying power. At this moment, a small black dot appeared in the distance and quickly flew toward Esnearly City. It was a flying battle formation formed by nearly 200 manticores. When they flew closer, they had already divided into two groups. About 70 to 80 manticores surrounded Baby, while the other 70 to 80 manticores went to meet the god of war. To Baby, this was an unforgivable offense. Baby's cry became louder, and then it spread its wings and took the initiative to meet the manticores. When the distance between the two sides was less than 500 meters, Baby suddenly opened its mouth and shot out a small fireball. In the blink of an eye, the small fireball had already become the size of a wheel. The manticore that was chosen by Baby had no time to dodge and was hit by the fireball. Captivating red flames and golden sparks danced and splashed in all directions. The nearby manticore let out miserable howls one after another. Some even turned into fire lions and fell straight to the ground. The next moment, Baby had already rushed through the flames, and what followed was a huge lightning pillar. Yelena's 10-grid thundercall was still in the process of releasing. The manticores that went to meet the god of war didn't have an easy time either. As soon as they got close, a row of javelins made entirely of electric elements flew toward them. The 8 or 9 manticores that flew at the front were turned into blood and flesh at the same time, and another row of javelins was shot toward them. The Titans led by Dominique weren't just for show. Although the Titans were weak, the combat power of a super-ranked race couldn't be ignored. Even the dizzy Jennifer forgot her fear and kept releasing lightning javelins under Dominique's command. Chapter 524. By the time Yelena, the god of war, and Adolf entered the battle, Han Jin had already appeared at the rear of the Abyss army. Coincidentally, more than 300 manticores quietly flew over and crashed into Han Jin's field of vision. This group of manticores was preparing to go to the front line to support their companions, but they didn't expect to meet a strange human here. Han Jin's Taoism was independent of all the cultivation systems in this world. Even Kathleen couldn't estimate Han Jin's true strength, so she could only test him bit by bit, not to mention the manticores. Immediately, 2 manticores left the group and swooped down toward Han Jin. Han Jin just stood there quietly with his eyes slightly closed. He was looking for the strong ones among the Abyss soldiers. As for the 2 manticores that swooped down, he didn't care at all. The situation seemed a bit strange. In this world, the strong ones were the real masters. The Abyss race had sent out nearly 1,000,000 soldiers, but why wasn't there a single strong one? Was it a trap? What was that Abyss devil called Leonardo trying to do? Where was the flame tyrant hiding? Han Jin slowly opened his eyes and let out a sigh. At this moment, the 2 manticores had already closed in on him. Han Jin moved his wrist, and a dazzling light suddenly burst into the sky. Han Jin moved and withdrew his sword very quickly. When the Abyss soldiers around him felt a stinging pain in their eyes, Han Jin had already returned to his original state and was still standing there quietly. The manticores that were rushing in front of him had obviously become stiff. A faint line of blood extended from the corner of their lips straight to the back. Perhaps because it was not as thick as its body, the scorpion tail at the back was the first to break. Then blood spurted out, and the manticore was split into 2. Most of its head, its smooth and tough back, and its pair of fleshy wings shot into the sky in the blood like a glider. The remaining half of its lips, most of its neck, for limbs, and its streamlined belly all fell to the ground. The view of the manticore behind them was blocked by the bloody light, but it also knew that something was wrong. It flapped its wings and tried to change its direction, but its speed was far slower than Han Jin's. Another ray of light flashed through the bloody light and chopped the manticore's neck, cutting off its huge head. Sure enough, Han Jin revealed a satisfied smile. This was a feeling that could only be found on the battlefield. For the past few days, he had been practicing with Adolf day and night. Later, he had let 2 angels join Adolf's camp to besiege Han Jin. But from beginning to end, he felt that something was missing. He wasn't happy, wasn't determined, and wasn't comfortable. All this was because he didn't have any killing intent in his heart. At this moment, Han Jin suddenly thought of Nicholas. He had heard from Jedis that Nicholas always took the lead on the battlefield and went straight to the enemy's center. None of the enemies that Nicholas eliminated were killed with the help of others. Because of this incomparably tough style, the army of the magnificent Light Empire had extremely high morale. They were invincible and would win every battle. In the past, he had thought that Nicholas was just like him, only protecting his friends and all the soldiers who relied on and trusted him. Now he understood that it was a process of self-cultivation. Seeing the 2 manticores killed in an instant, the soldiers of the Abyss were stunned for a moment. Then, they let out a battle cry and surrounded Han Jin. The 300 manticores in the air also changed their direction and rushed toward Han Jin with their blood-red eyes. They let out ear-piercing roars and rushed toward Han Jin in a hurry. Did Nicholas enter the Tao through killing? Han Jin slowly raised his eyelids. He was immersed in that wonderful state again. The next moment, the dazzling light of the blade bloomed between heaven and earth again. The blade rose like the wrath of thunder. The blade fell like the condensed light of the sea. Every time Han Jin casually waved, the dazzling light would spread dozens of meters or even hundreds of meters. All the Abyss soldiers along the way, whether it was the barking hellhounds or the tyrannical oxhead chieftains, were all cut in 2. No one could avoid it. At most, they made meaningless dodging movements. The last time he comprehended the blade intent, Han Jin canceled the spirit possession technique and closed his eyes. But now, he was fighting with all his strength because he knew that there must be a powerhouse hiding in the dark. This was an indescribable feeling. Wherever Han Jin's gaze swept, his body would float there. There was also the dazzling light of the blade. His line of sight, figure, and blade had perfectly fused together. Even Hanjin himself couldn't tell who was in front and who was behind. He only knew that the abyss soldiers that his gaze swept over had become incomplete corpses behind him. Fire! Hogan on the god of war roared. Hundreds of magic crystal cannons on the port side roared at the same time. Shining magic cannons streaked across the sky, dragging long trails behind them. They landed in the battle formation of the flame gidge and exploded, causing flesh and blood to splatter everywhere. Fire! Fire! Hogan kept roaring. Row after row of magic missiles flew out one after another. After suffering a loss, the Flame Gog Empire naturally would not sit still and wait for death. Some of them threw large fireballs into the sky in an attempt to intercept the magic missiles, while others changed their target to the God of War. However, the accuracy of the Flame Gidge's projectiles had always been criticized. Even though there were tens of thousands of Flame Gidge attacking together, they only managed to intercept a small portion of the magic bullets. Most of the magic bullets accurately landed in the battle formation of the Flame Gidge. The God of War trembled slightly. Although Harley kept the God of War at a certain altitude, hundreds of large fireballs still hit the God of War. However, this level of attack was almost useless. It couldn't break the 5 elements formation of the God of War. Harley, who was sitting lazily on the main seat, suddenly tensed up. The red light in his eyes flickered intensely. No one knew what he was thinking. On the right side of the ship, Dominique slowly raised her arm, indicating for the Titans to stop attacking. This was the advantage of having many strong people. They could cooperate with each other, but they could also fight individually. Just like now, Dominique was commanding the Titans to snipe the manticore that was pouncing on them. Hogan was playing with his own group of cannons. No one was delaying the other, and Harley was in charge of the coordination. The pride of lions that were trying to besiege the God of War had decreased from 70 to 80 to 50. They gave up on their target and turned to fly to the back. Although the manticore had a fast flying speed and its individual combat ability was not bad, it was undoubtedly a very stupid choice to force their way through the attacks of the Titans. Just a moment of hesitation had caused them to lose more than 30 companions. If they delayed any longer, perhaps none of them would be able to escape. Moreover, what could they do even if they rushed forward? The Titans had outstanding abilities in both long-range and close-range combat. A dozen or so Titans could kill them all as easily as chopping vegetables. However, the strong people of the Holy Crown City could not stop the attack of the Abyss race. Compared with the tide of countless Abyss warriors, Hanjin, Yelena, and the rampaging Adolf were very small. Even Hanjin's God of War was the same. Although Kemoratsi seized the opportunity and ordered the defenders to launch a full counterattack, they still could not take back the city wall. The warriors of both sides were mixed together, and the situation was getting more and more chaotic. After dozens of days of bloody battle, there were only a few 100,000 defenders left in Esnirli City, and the loss of the elites was very serious. Although the anxious Kemoratsi personally joined the battle, and the representatives of the House of Representatives led by Honduras also went all out, their efforts did not have much impact, and the situation was getting worse and worse. Spencer gently shook his head and whispered to Green Zinglean, "Your Excellency Green Zinglean, I'll leave this to you." He was ready to lead the mages of the Phoenix Legion into the battle. "You have to be careful." Green Zinglean hesitated, but did not stop Spencer. "I understand." Harley, who was sitting on the main seat, suddenly laughed, but his voice was so low that even the people standing next to him could not hear it. "Release! Release!" Hogan was still commanding the magicians. When he raised a small flag again, he was stunned. After a moment, he turned back to look at Harley. There was no other reason other than the fact that the God of War was rapidly descending. What was that guy planning to do? 5 elements flow, endlessly grow and multiply. Open. Hale began to chant a spell, and his bony hands began to form seals. Suddenly, a giant mountain appeared out of thin air, enveloping the entire god of war within. Green Zingline and Spencer were both stunned. After all, they joined later and did not have the chance to see the 5 elements formation of the god of war. La, la la la. Harley shook his head and sang a song. Obviously, he was extremely excited at this moment. Harley, are you crazy? Hogan finally could not hold it in and shouted. Shut up, idiot. Just guard your position. The arrogant Harley immediately retorted. My lord, look. A mage hurriedly shouted to Hogan. Hogan looked in the direction of the magician's finger and saw that the densely packed flame gidge had already locked onto the god of war. Following which, they threw countless large fireballs at the god of war. It was as if a huge cloud of fire was flying towards the god of war. Rise, rise. Hogan's face changed. You mother asterisk cur, hurry up and rise. It was too late. The huge cloud of fire had already hit the bottom of the 5 elements formation. Boom! A deafening explosion resounded throughout the battlefield. An indescribable elemental explosion caused the god of war to be thrown dozens of meters high. The hull of the ship was also tilted greatly, and it almost capsized. However, the god of war was its own world. Even if it kept somersaulting in the air, the people on the god of war would not fall. It could be said that this was the second time the god of war had suffered such a serious blow since it was built. The violent shaking caused the people on the ship to be in a mess. 2 of the magic crystal cannon's mounts were shattered. One of the magic crystal cannons hit the side of the ship, causing no damage. The other magic crystal cannon hit the leg of a mage, causing him to faint on the spot. Some other mages and a few thunderbirds were sent flying. Fortunately, the god of war was under the protection of the 5 elements formation, and all the people who were sent flying were bounced back. Jenny, who had just killed 2 manticores in the battle, was in high spirits. When she saw that the whole world was tilting and the ground was right in front of her, she was so scared that her old illness relapsed. She collapsed on the deck and hugged Dominguez's leg tightly. Her eyes were tightly shut, but this time she was better than the last time. At least she did not cry. Harley, what the hell are you doing? Hogan roared angrily after stabilizing himself. He and Harley were both Hanjin's servants and knew each other well. Otherwise, he would have suspected that Harley was trying to betray Hanjin. Harley, what's going on? Green was also very angry. He needed an explanation. Harley? Dominguez's voice was very cold. Harley. Sunir's voice was full of doubt. Gaobin was already standing in front of Harley, quietly looking at him. Gaobin was once an idol in the hearts of countless elves. After living in seclusion for a few decades, his spirit seemed to have been worn down by time. In fact, he just did not have the conditions and opportunity to fully unleash himself. If he could confirm that Harley's behavior was not right, and that he might endanger the people on the god of war, he would have immediately killed him. As for the relationship between Hanjin and Harley, that was not in his consideration. Come, come, let the flames burn even more fiercely. Ha ha! Harley let out a strange laugh, and the red light in his eyes seemed to have spread. Just like Hanjin, he was completely immersed in his own world. He could not see the angry expressions of the people, nor could he hear the voices of the people who were questioning him. Was this undead creature crazy? Gaobin frowned, then slowly reached out his hand. At this moment, another hand fell on Gaobin's shoulder. Then, Majordomo Gale's low voice came from behind him. Let him do it. He knows what he's doing. Look, the magic defense of the god of war has been restored. Gaobin raised his head and looked around. After being attacked by the Flame Gogs group, he saw that the giant mountain that was shrouding the god of war was faintly discernible. However, he did not know when the giant mountain had returned to its original state. No, it was even clearer than before. Every piece of rock could be seen clearly, as if it was real. Gaobin looked at Majordomo Gale suspiciously. Since Majordomo Gale had stepped forward to stop him, he must have guessed something. Do you remember the last time we fought with the orcs? The fate of those thunderbirds? Majordomo Gale whispered. Harley might be using the magic defense of the god of war to gather fire elements. Galbin suddenly realized that Yelena had greatly improved after that. However, at that time, Hanjin was personally controlling the god of war. Now it was Harley. Could he do it? Harley, what if he makes a mistake? It's not a problem. Major Domo Gale smiled. The range of the flame gog is limited. They can't let all the big fireballs they release hit our god of war. Come on, come on. Huh? Hale was still laughing maniacally. He was already in a completely condescending state. Under his control, the god of war changed direction and dived down diagonally. Major Domo Gale had not guessed wrongly. The giant holy crystal in the magic laboratory had turned fiery red. The flame gogs released their attacks again. Gao Bin, who had been carefully observing this scene, heaved a sigh of relief. The range of the flaming gogs was less than 500 meters. In other words, only the flaming gogs below the god of war and within 500 meters of the god of war could hit the god of war. Taking into account the difference in angle, there was at least another 100 meters. The number of flaming gogs within the attack range was very limited. The rest of the flaming gogs could only wait to attack. If they carelessly threw out large fireballs, it was very likely that they would hurt their own people. Boom! Another loud sound. The god of war was once again bounced up by the elemental explosion. However, this time, the people on the ship were prepared and did not panic too much. Oh! Harley let out a strange cry of excitement. His whole body was jumping and twisting in his seat, like a monkey that had drunk too much wine. The people on the ship looked at each other. However, even Gao Bin and Major Domo Gale had tacitly agreed to Harley's actions. The others could not say much. No one had expected that the one to save Esnearly City at this moment would be Harley. The god of war, which had provoked time and time again, had attracted the attention of most of the flame gogs. What gave Kemoratsi the most headache was how to send the backup troops up despite the blockade of the flame gogs. Now that the attention of the flame gogs had been diverted, with the addition of a large number of living forces and the help of the rampaging Adolf, the situation on the city wall had been reversed. The Abyss soldiers were pushed down the city wall bit by bit. The god of war kept rising, then diving down again, then rising again. Every time it attracted the attention of the flame gogs, thousands of them would attack. Hanjin's magic laboratory had turned fiery red. If this happened too many times, it would inevitably arouse suspicion. However, the flame gogs could not say anything. Before the battle broke out, the generals had already given orders. Lord Raphael, who was wearing a red cloak, was their first target, and the god of war was their second target. In other words, no matter what they faced, as long as they saw Hanjin and the god of war, they had to attack with all their might. They could even ignore the collateral damage caused to their companions. Moreover, even if there was no order, they would still give up Esnearly City. Every time the god of war dived, it would release a round of fierce artillery fire. From the perspective of protecting themselves, they had to destroy that abominable spaceship no matter what. Hanjin, who was deep in the enemy's rear, did not know how many times he had swung his sword. Every time he released his killing intent, he would easily reap dozens or even hundreds of lives. Of course, the Abyss army was huge. No matter how many he killed, the Abyss soldiers would immediately fill the gap. In the midst of the slaughter, Hanjin suddenly felt his heart inexplicably skip a beat. A few figures appeared in the distance. With this talent, they must be Abyss demons. However, those figures did not rush towards Hanjin. They kept moving diagonally. From the air, it seemed that they wanted to circle Hanjin, but the circle was getting smaller and smaller. Want to cut off my retreat? Idiot! Hanjin's mouth revealed a cruel smile. If he wanted to run, he could use Earth Meld. Those Abyss demons would not have to waste so much effort. Further away, Leonardo also had the same evaluation. Idiot! Then he turned around and ran away. Obviously, he had no intention of joining the battle. Chapter 5:25. For Snow White's sides suddenly emerged from the void and slashed down like lightning. The abyssal demons were extremely adept at attacking in groups. The flickering cold light wrapped around Hanjin, sealing off his path of retreat. However, Hanjin had no intention of retreating, nor did he release the ground-shrinking spell. He lightly crossed his hands, and his saber moved like thunder, easily blocking the two sides in front of him. Then, he used the force to drag the sides behind him. The two abyssal demons behind him were already smiling because their sides were less than 2 feet away from Hanjin. If they used a bit more force, they would be able to hit Hanjin. Who would have thought that Hanjin's saber would be able to reach them first? In a burst of sparks, the two abyssal demons felt a huge rebound force from their sides and involuntarily fell back. The 4 abyssal demons were stunned. They thought that Hanjin would use instant transmission, but Hanjin stood in place and forcibly blocked their attacks. However, this was exactly what they wanted. Some people were used to thinking of the worst when they encountered strange things, while others liked to think of the best. The abyssal demons belonged to the latter. So why didn't Hanjin retreat? Could it be that he encountered a special situation and temporarily lost the ability to instant transmission? This was truly the blessing of the Grim Reaper. The abyssal demons were unable to restrain their joy and once again waved their scythes. Hanjin's legs seemed to have grown roots and were firmly fastened to the ground. The saber light in his hand was constantly waving, and even his own figure was drowned out. The surrounding abyssal warriors could only see a bright purple light. The abyssal demons flickered around Hanjin, desperately waving their scythes. If their attacks were like stormy waves, then Hanjin was a towering reef. No matter how hard the abyssal demons tried, they were unable to break through his defense. If there were any abyssal warriors who had retired from the kingdom of magnificent light here, they would definitely feel their hair stand on end. This was because they had seen a similar scene before. At that time, there were a total of 13 great abyssal demons besieging the Emperor of Magnificent Light. But no matter how fast and vicious their attacks were, at the moment when they thought they were about to succeed, Nicholas's longsword inexplicably appeared in front of them. At that time, Nicholas did not even release his fighting aura, and his momentum was far inferior to Hanjin's now. On the outside, Hanjin's expression was somewhat blank, especially his pupils, which seemed to be unfocused and dull. However, his movements were incomparably agile, and he faintly emitting the power and pressure of wind and thunder. The Abyss warriors were experienced fighters. They would not wait until they hit a wall before turning around. In just a few minutes, they realized that something was wrong. Hanjin's blade was like an iron wall, making them feel powerless. Although their attacks were still fierce, they did not know when their confidence started to crumble. And why did Leonardo's attack? Ominous, the abyssal demons seemed to be able to understand each other's thoughts. They simultaneously made a feint, and their figures disappeared from their original positions and appeared on the other side in an instant. The 4 warriors stood side by side, but they were already more than 30 meters away from Hanjin. Hanjin's sword light froze. He slowly raised his eyes, and his blank pupils regained their vitality. In fact, he did not appear to be relaxed. The 4 sides were constantly aimed at his vitals. He could only try his best to be as fast as he could, as fast as he could, as fast as he could. If he made the slightest mistake, he would definitely suffer a fatal blow. If not for the protection of the faked Earth corpse, he would not have forced himself to do this, even though this was an extremely rare opportunity. Hanjin slowly took a deep breath, suppressing his surging blood. He had already pushed his vital energy to the limit, but he did not do it in vain. When his speed far surpassed his opponents, he suddenly realized that the abyssal demons, known as the Servants of Death, were actually so weak. Only the few of you, Hanjin said indifferently. Flame Tyrant Lonker's not here. Where's Leonardo? Hanjin did not mean anything else. He had only spoken his true thoughts. Defending and not attacking was only to draw out all the high-level combat power of the abyssal races, so that he could have a good time. However, to the abyssal demons, Hanjin's words were full of contempt. You guys are no good. Where are the Flame Tyrant Lonker and Leonardo? The Flame Tyrant was still fine. After all, Lonker was only ranked behind the three giants in the abyss. But what was Leonardo? I can still kill you without them. Veins popped out on the one-eyed demon Richard's forehead. His figure disappeared from his original position, pausing for a moment before appearing in front of Han Jin. He swung his scythe, viciously slashing at Han Jin's neck. The battle had begun once again. However, the battle had just begun when it ended. At least, it was Richard's end. The moment Richard appeared in front of Han Jin's figure suddenly shot out, his sword light blooming at the same time. It was a breathtaking strike. The flowing light was as pure and flawless as the moon, and the momentum was as fierce and swift as lightning. The entire world seemed to freeze at this moment. Richard's scythe was smashed into pieces. If one were to slow down time, they would see that his figure was gradually fading away, which meant that he had used teleportation. Unfortunately, Han Jin's blade had already passed through his neck. Richard's head flew off his neck, while Han Jin's figure continued to shoot forward. His sword light did not stop as he slashed at the abyssal demons in front of him. An extremely strange scene appeared. Richard's head, body, and the splattering blood all disappeared without a trace. The next moment, he appeared behind the three abyssal demons. The large head continued to fly upwards, blood splattering everywhere, while the headless body fell forward softly. Flying corpse. The remaining three abyssal demons were not so easy to kill. After all, they had a buffer of more than 30 meters. Sensing that something was wrong, they immediately used teleportation. Han Jin's sword light swept through the air. Then, they appeared in the distance and fled in panic. One of the abyssal demons turned around and cried out, "Richard!" Then he saw the terrifying flying corpse and was immediately scared out of his wits. He turned around and used teleportation again. Han Jin's lips curled into a cruel smile. He had to thank Leonardo for provoking him. In the past few days, besides cultivating, he had been thinking about how to deal with the abyssal demon's teleportation. Now was the time to experiment. The abyssal demon, who cried out in grief, had appeared in the distance. Han Jin's divine telekinesis immediately locked onto the demon's figure. Then he formed a spell. A faint fluorescent light appeared in the air and chased after the abyssal demon. Then, the abyssal demon used teleportation again, but the fluorescent light did not seem to be affected and continued to fly forward. Because it was too fast, the fluorescent light left a streamline behind it that was at least 100 meters long. Mother and child soul-chasing curse. In another world, the mother and child soul-chasing curse was usually used to deal with difficult ghosts and demons. As long as one used divine telekinesis to hit the target in time, the mother curse would pursue relentlessly. Even if there were mountains and rivers between them, even if there were countless arrays in the way, it would persevere. If the Tao power did not dissipate, then the mother and child soul-chasing curse would eventually overlap one day. However, because the mother and child soul-chasing curse did not have any actual killing power, Han Jin had placed this spell in the corner of his memory. Otherwise, Leonardo would not have been able to escape so easily a few days ago. Han Jin formed a spell and used the earth-shrinking curse, chasing in the direction of the mother curse. The earth-shrinking curse was not as convenient as teleportation in battle, but the distance it could move far exceeded teleportation. When the abyssal demon that he had locked onto appeared again, Han Jin was only a dozen meters away from him. The abyssal demon did not understand why Han Jin was chasing him so closely, but it was obviously not the time to think. The only thing he could do was to immediately use teleportation. Han Jin's figure paused for a moment, then shot in the direction that the mother curse was pointing, and the saber light lit up again. The abyssal demon's teleportation could be completed in an instant, but it would take a little time to appear in the locked position. Although Han Jin moved with all his might, he was still much slower than the abyssal demon. This time, the distance between the two had increased by more than 50 meters. After all, Han Jin relied on jumping to move forward. Han Jin smiled. The abyssal demon had become a frightened bird. Every time he used teleportation, he would choose the furthest distance. This was his weakness. With a certain distance, he could easily predict the direction that the demon would escape. The moment the abyssal demon disappeared, Hanjin also released the earth-shrinking curse. With a soft shout, a bright saber light that seemed to cut the world in half appeared. The next moment, the abyssal demon appeared in the saber light. Before he could react, he was slashed in two by Hanjin. The abyssal demon had a look of disbelief in his eyes, and the scythe in his hand fell to the ground. Hanjin ignored him, jumped up, and chased after another abyssal demon. The fluorescent light shot and hit the abyssal demon's forehead, flashed, and disappeared. Regardless of whether the creature possessed by the curse was a demon, dead or alive, it could not stop them from overlapping. Hanjin formed a spell, and while his divine thought locked onto the demon's figure, he released the mother-child soul-tracking curse again. When the abyssal demon saw that his brothers were killed one after another, he panicked to the extreme and made the same mistake. He only wanted to try his best to stay away from the terrifying human, but he neglected to cover his tracks. Techniques had to be practiced in battle. This time, Hanjin did not act rashly. First, he released 4 earth-shrinking curses in succession to close the distance. When the abyssal demon disappeared, Hanjin immediately appeared more than 100 meters in front of him. As the abyssal demon's teleportation distance was only between 110 and 120 meters, his position was just right. Hanjin's figure paused for a moment, and then he slashed out diagonally. It seemed that he was deliberately cooperating with Hanjin. The abyssal demon appeared in front of Hanjin's saber and was immediately slashed diagonally by Hanjin. Although the remaining abyssal demon continued to release teleportation, he could still sense that his brothers were killed one after another. He did not know whether he wanted to avenge his brothers, was simply scared out of his mind, or knew that he could not escape. He actually turned around, roared, and rushed toward Hanjin. Hanjin stood with his saber and looked at the demon coldly. When the distance between them was less than 200 meters, he once again locked onto the demon's figure with his divine thought. A fluorescent light appeared in the air, and then it shot forward. Hanjin's figure floated up at the same time, and he slashed down with his saber. The fluorescent light was in front, and Hanjin's saber light was behind it. It was neither close nor far, and it was neither close nor distant, like a swift chasing after a cunning flying insect. The abyssal demon appeared in front of Hanjin, and the fluorescent light flew into the demon's forehead and disappeared in a flash. Seeing that Hanjin's saber light was close to his forehead, the abyssal demon did not dodge. He immediately waved his scythe and slashed toward Hanjin's waist. It was completely a suicidal attack. Hanjin's reaction was extremely fast, and the saber immediately changed from a forward swing to a downward slash. The bright light had already cut into the abyssal demon's forehead and extended straight down. When the abyssal demon's scythe was cut in half, his body was also split to the left and right. The tip of the scythe, flashing cold light, only grazed Hanjin's waist and abdomen. Not to mention the light battle robe. Even the dragon scale armor was intact. After killing 4 abyssal demons in a row, Hanjin's face was still cold and indifferent. Then he turned around and rushed toward the abyssal soldiers who were stunned. On the large-scale battlefield, the powerhouses of Esnerly City and Holy Crown City were in a disadvantageous situation. The army of the abyssal race was still surging forward like a tide, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. In the small-scale battle, Hanjin, Yelena, and Adolf had all the advantages, especially Yelena, who had caused far more damage than Hanjin. From the beginning of the battle until now, she had released 5 Thunder Call spells. At this moment, huge lightning pillars were still pouring down with her body as the center. The power of Baby was also not to be underestimated. Not to mention the fireballs it released. Every time it spread its wings, it scattered a little bit of Nirvana flame, which seemed insignificant, but when it fell on the bodies of the abyssal soldiers, it could burn through their bodies without any hindrance. The busiest person was Adolf. When he rushed to the left, The enemy on the right seized the opportunity and quickly rushed up the city wall. When he rushed to the right, the enemy on the left broke through the defense line of Nearly City. Although he kept releasing holy impact, there were too many enemies. Almost every second, thousands of abyssal soldiers rushed up the city wall. Even if he had 3 heads and 6 arms, he couldn't kill so many enemies. Everyone, including Hanjin, tried their best, but some things couldn't be reversed. Perhaps when Hanjin and Yelena killed all the abyssal soldiers and the army collapsed, Nearly would have become a dead city. The battle on the northern city wall of Nearly City was in full swing, while the southern city wall was much quieter because most of the soldiers had been transferred there. Suddenly, a faint black cloud appeared in the sky. The soldiers on the southern city wall were looking to the north, quietly listening to the distant shouts. At this moment, they turned around and looked at the black cloud in surprise. "Do you feel anything?" a soldier whispered. "It seems like an earthquake." "That's right." The ground was shaking slightly, and the shaking was getting stronger and stronger. When the black cloud flew closer, the soldiers saw that it wasn't a cloud, but a flying battle formation formed by countless wyvern knight. Wyverns weren't giant dragons, but a type of 2-legged wyvern that lived in the southern swamps. The 2-legged wyvern was a level 10 magical beast, and its combat power was relatively low compared to other magical beasts of the same level. Its only specialty was its ability to spit acid poison gas, and the wyvern knight was a specialty of the Southern Tribal Alliance. Did the Tribal Alliance really send reinforcements? The soldiers of Nearly City cried with joy. Some waved their arms with all their might, and some jumped with all their might. They even wanted to jump down from the city wall to welcome the arrival of the Tribal Alliance. In fact, as long as the tribal leader had some foresight, sending reinforcements was inevitable. Sending a large number of lizardmen warriors as reinforcements was a strong proof. Everyone knew that if the lips were gone, the teeth would be cold. Since the Freedom Federation couldn't stop the Abyssal Race's army, the flames of war would burn over sooner or later. It was better to send reinforcements to their allies and fight in other people's territory. At least they could ensure that their own people wouldn't be invaded. Closer, closer. Below the flying battle formation formed by the Wyvern Knight, there were tens of thousands of armored bulls. The ground was shaking violently because of these rampaging bulls. The Bull Knight was also a major characteristic of the Tribal Alliance. In the past wars, the Freedom Federation had suffered a lot, so in recent years, they had formed their own Bull Knight Corps. A gigantic armored bull that could be described as demonic charged at the very front. It was at least twice the size of its companions, and its weight was even greater. Its hard skin was black and shiny, and when it ran at full speed, it looked like a heavy tank from another world. It was filled with an unstoppable momentum. A knight rode on the back of that huge bull. For some reason, the bull didn't have any armor, stirrups, or reins. That knight's horsemanship should be very high. His whole body was covered in heavy armor, and only his eyes were exposed. His eyes were tightly shut, and his head was nodding, as if he was sleeping. Soon, that huge bull was less than 2,000 meters away from Nearly City. The Wyvern Knight could keep up, but the other armored bulls had long been left behind. Suddenly, that huge bull's forehooves tightened and firmly supported itself on the ground. Its powerful inertia caused its hooves to sink nearly half a foot into the ground. The knight on its back was caught unprepared and shot straight out. Coincidentally, there was a stone tablet in front of it, with a string of words written on it. Nearly City welcomes you. That knight hit the stone tablet. Perhaps it was too fast, or perhaps the stone tablet was too tough, but the knight's head broke through the stone tablet and flew far away with it. The stone tablet broke, but didn't break, and just hung around the knight's neck. Aya! That knight finally woke up from his dream. He hurriedly got up and pulled the stone tablet out, or pulled his head out, and then shouted in exasperation, "Buddy, even if we haven't known each other for a long time and don't have any feelings for each other, you don't have to be so rude, right?" That huge bull ignored him. It stretched out its nose as if it was sniffing something. Then it let out an excited and joyful roar, and once again charged forward with its four hooves. Sorry, I didn't explode. I wanted to explode, but my inspiration was against me. My mind was empty, and I could only jump out word by word. From 1 a.m. until now, I've only written these 5,000 words. I'll try to sleep early today and tomorrow. Chapter 526. Facing the endless abyss warriors. A sense of defeat slowly emerged in everyone's hearts. Was there still hope? Everyone's temperament was different, and they would react differently in the face of failure. Some people would become more courageous in the face of setbacks and would not give up until the last moment. Some people would be defeated by themselves before the real failure and lose their will to fight. Adolf and Yelena belonged to the former. Especially Yelena. Her lethality was getting more and more terrifying. Just the magic of 10 grid thundercall was no longer enough to vent her resistance and hatred for failure. Chain lightning, thunder roar, and other large-scale destructive spells were released one after another in her hands. Also, because of the perfect combination of fire and electricity, Yelena could create a no-man's land among the Abyss warriors with a wave of her hand. In terms of the number of casualties, Hanjin and Adolf added together could not compare to her. The title of the chief fighter of the god of war was destined to fall on her. However, not everyone was human. Hanjin and Harley were exceptions. At least they could no longer be measured by the word human. Hanjin would not become more courageous in the face of setbacks, nor would he be discouraged. He had completely sunk into the realm of selflessness. Even if Nearly City behind him turned into ruins, it would not affect his state of mind at all. And Harley did not care about the safety of Nearly City. Of course, the god of war could not be damaged, or else Hanjin would definitely not forgive him. At this moment, Harley was operating the god of war with all his strength, constantly attracting the firepower of the flame Gidge. However, he had to pay attention to the distance between them to avoid receiving attacks that exceeded the limit and to prevent the 5 elements formation from being destroyed. After all, this was the first time he had activated the formation of the god of war alone, so he was not confident. If it was Hanjin, the effect would be much better. Seeing that the enemy and his side were still locked in a tug of war, with no one able to completely control the wall, Camerazzi's expression gradually turned cold. He couldn't blame the soldiers, nor could he blame Adolf. In fact, every soldier was fighting with their lives on the line. In just a short 30 minutes, he didn't know how many wounded soldiers were roaring and rushing towards the enemy. Some had lost an arm, some had broken a leg, and some had even had their stomachs hollowed out by the hellhounds. They didn't care about the intestines flowing all over the ground as they continued to shout and charge towards the enemy. Adolf had also used everything he had, including Great Blessing, Great Prayer, Wrath of the Holy Spirit, and Holy Shock. For the warriors of Nearly City, all kinds of spells that only existed in legends appeared before them one after another. Great Blessing and Great Prayer were both enhancement spells that could double the combat power of the warriors. However, the problem was that the high-end combat power of Nearly City had been severely damaged. Even if the ordinary warriors were enhanced by Great Blessing and Great Prayer, their combat power would not increase by much. Furthermore, they would be quickly eliminated in the fierce battle and be replaced by the reserve troops. It was impossible for Adolf to use this type of spell repeatedly to enhance the reserve troops. Otherwise, his power would be rapidly depleted. Gradually, more than a dozen points were formed on the city wall. Each point was supported by a few or a dozen high-level warriors. Adolf's magic had a huge effect on them. This was also the main reason why they had been able to survive from the start of the battle until now. Unfortunately, just like throwing a few stones into a river would not be able to stop the flow of the water, there were too few of them. They were unable to form a dam. More and more Abyss warriors rushed through the gaps between them. Adolf was doing a thankless job. If it were Hanjin or Yelena, they would also have a hard time. Waves of warriors rushed to replace them, and waves after waves of warriors died. Of course, the number of deaths of the Abyss warriors was also increasing rapidly. However, the numbers of both sides were disproportionate. The Abyss race could afford to die, but Esnerly City could not. Kemoratsi was very clear that the reason the battle had reached such a state was because the powerful god of war had attracted most of the firepower of the flame god. Once the god of war could not hold on, Esnerly City would not be far from falling. Master Honduras. Kemoratsi's voice was a little hoarse. What's wrong, Master Kemoratsi? Honduras hurriedly responded. The two men's eyes met. Although Honduras only knew politics and not military affairs, he could see the sadness and determination in Kemoratsi's eyes. His heart couldn't help but beat violently. It's the last moment, Kemoratsi said in a low voice. What? Honduras sucked in a breath of cold air. Sir Raphael and the others aren't. There are too many Abyss warriors. They can't stop them with just a few people, Kemoratsi said with a bitter smile. Our magic array was forcefully destroyed, and the Mage Tower can no longer be activated. The Abyss army certainly won't give us time to repair the Mage Tower, right? Honduras was stunned for a moment. His head sank little by little, and his back bent. He said slowly then, Master Kemoratsi, it's up to you to decide. From now on, I will be an ordinary soldier under your command. After saying that, Honduras reached out and pulled out a long sword from the waist of a guard beside him. The guard was shocked. He stepped forward and tried to snatch the long sword back, but Honduras pushed him away fiercely. In the past, they had conflicts. One was in charge of military affairs, and the other was in charge of restrictions. But at this moment, death was about to befall everyone. What else could they not let go of? Snarly, send the signal, Kemoratsi said word by word. The city will live if the people live, and the city will die if the people die. I don't have the confidence to defeat the Abyss army, but as long as one of our warriors is alive, we will never allow those filthy bastards to take a step into Esnerly City. Understood, Master. Snarly smiled and waved his hand. A scorching white light arrow shot into the sky and exploded with a loud bang, turning into a firework that didn't disperse. That was the signal for the final battle. The Mage Tower in Esnerly City was completely silent. Figures floated out of the Mage Tower, flew into the air, and gathered together. Each Mage Tower required more than a dozen magicians to operate. When they gathered together, they were a force to be reckoned with. Moreover, as they flew forward, more and more people rose from below and joined their ranks. They were the remaining magicians of the Freedom Federation's Magic Legion. Kemoratsi had been hiding them, waiting for a critical moment, and now it was the final moment. One by one, the soldiers gathered on the streets. At this moment, there were no more reserves. There were also many injured soldiers. They supported each other as they walked out of the barracks. Those who could not move asked their companions for weapons. Then, they tightly gripped the swords in their hands and lay there, waiting silently. This scene reminded the other injured soldiers. They distributed weapons to their companions. Even those who were unconscious would gently leave a long sword by their pillows. Suddenly, a courtyard door opened. A middle-aged couple walked out of the courtyard, followed by 3 or 4 half-grown children. Every one of them held a weapon in their hands. Esnerly City was a relatively wealthy city. When the Abyss army began their attack, Kemoratsi had already given the order to distribute weapons to every citizen in case of emergency. In comparison, the middle-aged man's expression was still calm. However, the middle-aged woman's cheeks were still stained with tears. She followed beside her husband while trying to grab the children's hands. Perhaps this was her habit. She would only feel at ease if she held onto the children tightly when shopping. However, no matter who she grabbed, the children would shake her hand off forcefully. They believed that they would soon become warriors and no longer needed the support of their parents. More courtyard doors opened one after another. Men and women, old and young, all of them silently followed the soldiers on both sides. The atmosphere was particularly depressing. That's right, even ants would drag out their lives. However, when Nearly City was occupied by the Abyss army, there would be no more survivors. So what was there to worry about? In the past few weeks, countless warriors had died in Nearly City. Almost every family had someone who had joined the army. Therefore, they had to follow their loved ones and enjoy every minute and second of their lives. If there was a chance to kill the Abyss warriors, then they would do it. They would avenge all the dead. The city gates of Nearly City opened one after another. This was a true counterattack of the entire city. No matter what kind of power they could unleash, at least they had shown their unyielding determination. Bauer took a deep breath and knelt on one knee in front of Kemoratsi. He said proudly, "Sir, please allow me to fight." Although he displayed a strong fighting spirit, everyone could see the look in his eyes. He was bidding farewell. Kemoratsi stared at Bauer. Suddenly, tears welled up in his eyes. He was a little out of control. He walked a few steps to Bauer and hugged him. He said in a trembling voice, "Child, don't complain about your heartless father anymore. He has his own difficulties." When Honduras heard Kemoratsi's words, his eyes flickered. As an expert in political tactics, he immediately solved the question he had for a long time. Why did Kemoratsi always take care of a commoner child with mediocre aptitude? Little by little, he helped the child to become the commander of the Night Corps. So this was the reason. The governor of the Freedom Confederation was elected by the Senate. The governor's power was pitifully small compared to the local lords. As long as they were caught red-handed, they could be impeached. Even mistakes in their lives were not allowed. However, Honduras was not in the mood to make trouble. This was completely different from his usual style. He silently watched for a moment and suddenly said, "Kemoratsi, bless him." Kemoratsi was shocked. He looked back at Honduras, only to see a warm smile on that old face that he always wanted to beat up. There were some things that didn't need to be said too clearly. Kemoratsi smiled reluctantly, then leaned over and kissed Bauer on the forehead. Bauer was not surprised, nor did he struggle. On the contrary, he closed his eyes. When Kemoratsi's lips left his forehead, Bauer slowly opened his eyes. There were tears in his eyes. Then Bauer stood up, pulled out his long sword, and shouted, "Brothers!" Before he could finish his words, Bauer was stunned again. His brothers had either died on the battlefield or on the way to the rescue. The rest of them were left in the Holy Crown City. Not to mention his brothers, he didn't even have an armored bull. Thinking of this, Bauer couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Ha ha, here." The guards who followed the representatives of the Senate pulled out their long swords and responded proudly. Many of them were more powerful than Bauer, but at this moment, none of them wanted to fight for the victory. They were all willing to follow Bauer's command. Human beings had desires, so there were all kinds of conflicts. However, death was coming soon, and all the disputes became meaningless. Instead of disliking each other in the face of death, it was better to be brothers for the last time. "Follow me." Bauer's momentum suddenly soared, and he took the lead to rush to the open north gate. Just as Bauer approached the gate, a burst of roars suddenly came from behind him. Countless wyvern night flew at a low altitude, their figures completely covering Nearly City. The Freedom Federation and the Tribal Alliance's strength were almost the same. Otherwise, they wouldn't have fought for so long without a clear winner. The only difference was that the Freedom Federation was suddenly invaded by the Abyss race. The army couldn't effectively concentrate and could only fight for themselves. After dozens of days of fierce fighting, the casualties were too great. The Tribal Alliance, on the other hand, was conserving their strength and only sent some lizardmen warriors to support them. Later, when they learned that the Freedom Federation couldn't hold on, they made a prompt decision to send all their elites to the Freedom Federation. Actually, it was already very impressive for a tribe to have a few hundred wyvern knights. Now, there were more than 100,000 wyvern knights and more than 300,000 barbarian bull knights. All of them were elites. They were the final trump card of the Tribal Alliance. If they were annihilated by the Abyss Legion, the Tribal Alliance would lose all fighting power. In the east of Nearly City, the Bull Knights also began to charge. The extremely conspicuous giant armored bull was still far ahead, charging at the forefront. The knight, covered in heavy armor, was baring his fangs and brandishing his claws, constantly waving the long spiked club in his hand. He looked imposing and valiant, as if he wasn't inferior to Hanjin, who liked to challenge a group of opponents by himself. But in reality, that wasn't the case. The knight kept trying to communicate with the giant armored bull. Slow down, buddy. Slow down, okay? At this time, the knight still seemed very calm. Hey, do you see how many Abyss warriors there are in front? Too many. The knight's tone became surprised. Slow down. What's the use of just the two of us? Each of them could easily drown us with their saliva. At this moment, the knight was clearly becoming anxious. Oh, F***, are you trying to play me to death? I just became the great leader. I don't want to die. Did you King hear me? I don't want to die. He was obviously going crazy. Unfortunately, no matter how he communicated with it, the enormous armored bull was determined to charge forward. The closer it got to a certain place, the more violent and faster it became. Its enormous figure actually faintly emitted the sound of wind and thunder from the friction between it and the air, and its four thick hooves flipped madly, drawing out numerous afterimages as it simply seemed like a windmill that spun at high speed. The knight was enraged and finally raised his mace. Looking at his posture, it seemed like he wanted to smash the iron-armored bull beneath him. However, he hesitated for a moment and slowly put down his mace. Using his fingertips, he stroked the iron-armored bull's neck a few times with a pained expression. Then, he decided to just go all out. Damn it, if I have to go all out, then I'll go all out kill. Outside the Abyss army, there were tens of thousands of hellhounds wandering around. When they saw the giant charging over, they subconsciously surrounded it and prepared to attack. When they got closer, they realized that things weren't that simple. The giant armored bull was too fast, even faster than a manticore that had the ability to fly. Some hellhounds had just opened their mouths when the giant armored bull had already charged over. Then, the smoke and dust that came after swept them off their feet. Some hellhounds saw the giant armored bull charging towards them and tried to dodge to the side. However, just as their front legs left the ground, the bull's thick hooves had already trampled over them. With just a slight contact, their bodies were directly trampled into a pile of meat paste. The giant armored bull was like a sharp sword, easily cutting through the large group of hellhounds and charging straight ahead. Nothing could stop its advance. The knights on the bull's back also joined the battle. Balls of yellow-brown fighting techniques were constantly blooming. The long spiked club in their hands was swung up and down, left and right, and they were swinging it around vigorously like a tiger. The ground was trembling more and more violently, and large groups of bull knight gradually approached the battlefield. Their morale was greatly boosted at the sight of their valiant leader, who was able to disregard the million-strong abyssal army as if they didn't exist. They then let loose deafening cheers as they swung their mace with all their might to spur on the bull beneath them. The Ironhide bull was only a 7th-tier magic beast, and the evolved armored bull would only be an 8th-tier magic beast. According to the standards of this world, the combat prowess of long-horned evil spirits was equivalent to that of 5th-tier or 6th-tier magic beasts, which was slightly inferior to that of the armored bull. Meanwhile, the combat prowess of normal minotaurs was between 7th-tier and 8th-tier magic beasts. However, the giant armored bull definitely couldn't be measured by normal standards. Its aura was far too powerful, and regardless of whether it was long-horned evil spirits or minotaurs, they were all sent flying into the air. Even a 10th-tier unicorn would have been torn to shreds by the long-horned evil spirits. However, the giant armored bull wasn't afraid at all. It continued to charge in one direction. However, the knight felt the pressure. He could ignore the hellhounds, and he didn't even need to do anything. However, the long-horned evil spirits and minotaurs behind him were a bit more difficult to deal with. The high-tier minotaurs and long-horned evil spirits that appeared from time to time posed a threat to him. Finally, he unleashed his fighting aura without holding back. A ball of dense, almost tangible light spread out in a radius of 6 to 7 meters, enshrouding himself and the giant armored bull within. Glenn, who just so happened to be able to see this scene with his eyes of penetration, immediately determined that this man was a knight supreme. The fearless charge of one man and one bull not only inspired the warriors of the tribal alliance, but also greatly boosted the morale of the warriors of Esnearly City. They knew that this was the reinforcements of the tribal alliance. Countless Wyvern Knights had already charged past Esnearly City and entered the battle first. A full-scale, chaotic battle had erupted. Chapter 5:27. Most of the magic beasts in this world had two forms. One was before, and the other was after evolution. Of course, there were many magic beasts that couldn't evolve in their entire lives. Ordinary wyverns were grass-green in color, while advanced wyverns were greenish-black in color. In the wyvern army sent by the Tribal Alliance, 1/3 of the wyverns were advanced wyverns, which formed a sharp contrast with the defenders of Esnearly City and the Abyssal Army. Esnearly City's high-end combat power was severely depleted, while the proportion of high-level warriors in the Abyssal Army was pitifully small. According to the records of the First World War, there would be 1 Minotaur chieftain and a dozen Minotaurs for every 100 Minotaurs. Also, this time, the Abyss had sent out more than 200,000 longhorn demons, but there wasn't a single evil spirit to be seen. To put it bluntly, the longhorn demons were just cannon fodder, while the evil spirits were the true main fighting force of the demon vassal races. All signs indicated that the army that appeared in the Freedom Federation was just an auxiliary force. Donald's main goal in the first battle was to destroy the magnificent Light Empire, so the elite forces would naturally be concentrated there. After thinking this through, Zenlin's expression became a little strange. He didn't know if he should be gloating or bemoaning the state of the universe. The world became even darker. Countless wyverns had covered the entire sky. The target of the first wave of attack was the Flame Gogs. There were 2 people sitting on the back of each wyvern. The ones sitting at the back were the archers. They were constantly shooting left and right, desperately releasing arrows. The ones in front were the true knights. Their right arms were firmly holding onto a 7 to 8 meter long war spear. This kind of weapon was a huge test of physical strength. Most of the warriors could only sit there silently and try their best to remain motionless. They could borrow the speed and strength of the wyverns to pierce through the enemies one by one. The knights riding on the advanced wyverns could brandish their war spears without any scruples. In the distance, the formation formed by more than 300,000 barbarian bull knights had finally entered the battlefield. The entire field had been completely transformed. No matter if it was the crops, the weeds, or the trees, everything had been destroyed. The barbarian bull knights were shouting crazily and waving their spiked clubs with all their might. It was as if they didn't have a tomorrow. Training hard, fighting, comprehending, and so on. Everything was for the sake of unleashing their full potential today. The Hellhounds were the first to suffer. Their formation was too dense, but the Bull Knights' formation was even denser. There was no way for them to retreat or dodge. In the blink of an eye, the Hellhounds were trampled to the ground by thousands of hooves. However, this was not the end of it. The Hellhounds continued to trample and crush the Hellhounds, turning them into broken pieces and even pushing them deep into the ground. Actually, a single armored bull wasn't that scary. Any high-level warrior would be able to kill a berserk armored bull with a little bit of time. However, when hundreds of thousands of armored bulls charged together, it wasn't something that could be stopped by a human. The Flame Gogs noticed the Wyvern Knight and hurriedly changed their target. Large fireballs formed a red cloud of fire and rose from the ground. Boom! Boom, boom, boom. Violent explosions sounded one after another. The dark sky suddenly became bright. The intercepting firepower released by the Flame Gogs was too dense. Almost every wyvern that charged at the front was hit by a dozen or more large fireballs. Their hard skin that was covered with scales was instantly burnt, and holes of various sizes appeared on their wings. The explosion of the large fireballs spread to the knight and archers behind them. For a moment, Countless figures and wyverns fell from the sky like raindrops. The first wave of attack launched by the wyvern army was almost completely wiped out. However, even more figures charged out from the flames and continued to approach the flame gogs. The knight was actually using their lives to exchange for time and space. Of the warriors that fell, some lost their lives on the spot. Some were heavily injured, but some immediately jumped up and threw away their useless spears. They pulled out their long swords and charged forward while shouting. If they failed, this would not only be the last battle for Esnerly City, it would also be the last battle for the Horde Alliance. All the warriors knew that the winner would live and the loser would die. Hogan saw that a large number of reinforcements had arrived. He hurriedly ordered the mages to desperately release cannon fire to provide cover for the Horde Alliance. Meanwhile, Harley was still immersed in his own world. Seeing that he suddenly couldn't absorb the fire elements, he waved his bone staff in dissatisfaction and muttered something. Boom! 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 The Flame Gods once again released a group attack. The second-tier Wyvern Knight situation wasn't much better than their companions. Moreover, because the distance was shortened by almost 100 meters, they suffered even more attacks. At this moment, a figure shot out from the city wall. As if riding the wind and stepping on the mist, it flew straight for a few hundred meters. Then it abruptly stopped in the air. Following that, streaks of pure white light spread out in all directions with that figure as the center. Within a radius of a few thousand meters, the warriors from both sides were enveloped by the light. However, their reactions were completely different. The warriors of Esnerly City and the Horde Alliance suddenly let out thunderous roars, while the warriors of the Abyss howled. The surface of their bodies that were covered by the light was already emitting bursts of smoke, as if something was burning. The next moment, Adolf's arms had already reached towards the sky. Suddenly, a ray of light rolled in the clouds, then turned into countless pillars of light that fell vertically, forming a forest of light. That ray of light seemed to have its own life. Each pillar of light accurately enveloped every warrior. The movements of the warriors of Esnerly City and the Knight of the Horde Alliance suddenly sped up. Even the wyverns were affected. Moreover, that ray of light didn't disperse and continued to envelop those warriors. The warriors of the Abyss let out mournful cries. After being enveloped by the pillars of light, their bodies were rapidly shrinking and even festering. In the end, they turned into squeaky piles of meat paste. Adolf once again released Great Blessing and Great Prayer. As a demigod, Adolf could completely control the power of magic at will, so as to avoid meaningless losses. Previously, he didn't use his full strength. Now, at the most critical moment, he showed his value in the sharpest way. Hanjin and Adolf were the only two powerhouses in the Holy Crown City who could change the whole situation by themselves. However, their methods were completely different. Hanjin preferred to find the enemy's commander and behead him directly, while Adolf preferred to help his comrades to turn the situation around. The stronger his comrades were, the more valuable he was. The Flying Dragon Army was in the third, fourth, and fifth wave of attacks. They were all made up of advanced, twin-legged flying dragons. Obviously, the first two attacks were just a cover, and the elites of the Flying Dragon Army were behind them. It was certainly not a coincidence that Adolf released all his magic at this time. After seeing through the intention of the Flying Dragon Legion, he immediately made the right decision. The blue-black wyverns quickly passed through the exploding flames and approached the flaming gogs like lightning. Before the flaming gogs could react, a snow-white forest of spears had already fallen from the sky. Flaming gogs' dying cries rose and fell one after another. The flying speed of the wyverns was already extremely fast, and the knights were doing their best to brandish their spears. Flaming Gog was not good at close combat, so it was impossible for him to avoid the knights' attacks. Blood splashed and blood spurted out. Flaming Gogs fell down one by one, with broken limbs flying everywhere. The bodies of the Flaming Gogs became extremely fragile. Some of the knights could pierce through the bodies of several Flaming Gogs with a single thrust of their spears, and then skewer them together like grasshoppers. Sometimes, the light of a fighting technique would suddenly flash, even extending to 100 meters, and all the flaming gogs along the way would be smashed into pieces. In the blink of an eye, the fourth and fifth waves of Flying Dragon Knight also rushed into the battle formation. In order to capture Esnierly City as soon as possible, the flaming gogs formed a large square formation. They couldn't support each other when gathered together, so they could only wait to be slaughtered. If there was something that could calculate the casualties caused by the powerhouses in detail and accuracy, it would find that after releasing 2 light forbidden spells in a row, the number belonging to Adolf was rapidly increasing, far surpassing that of Yelena, the chief fighter. A total of 6,000 to 7,000 elite Flying Dragon Knights received Adolf's blessing, and their strength soared in the blink of an eye. Knights became great knights, and the combat power of a great knight was close to that of a supreme knight. This kind of enhancement was extremely terrifying. If every time a flying dragon swooped down, a flying dragon knight could kill an extra enemy, or if they were supposed to miss, but ended up hitting the enemy with a sudden increase in strength, then the accumulated number under Adolf's name would increase by thousands. In just a dozen breaths, the airspace of the Flaming Gods was completely occupied by the Flying Dragon Knights, and the battle formation of the Flaming Gods was riddled with holes. They had lost the opportunity to attack as a group, one against one, or one against several. The large fireballs released by the Flaming Gogs couldn't hurt the Knights and Wyverns who were buffed. However, the Flying Dragon Knights didn't tangle with the Flaming Gogs for too long. Instead, they continued to fly forward, leaving the remaining enemies to the Knights behind them. Their mission was to penetrate the entire battlefield. The situation of the battle was completely reversed. If the Bull Knights were like an unstoppable road mill, constantly crushing the Abyss army, then the Flying Dragon Knights were like a giant sword that was thousands of meters wide, pressing forward with an indomitable will. The powerhouses on the God of War were also stunned. The combat power of the Flying Dragon Knights was too terrifying. Although they knew that Adolf was the only remaining demigod powerhouse of the Holy See, and they also knew the power of light magic, it was far from being as shocking as witnessing it with their own eyes. Thousands of warriors whose strength was close to that of a supreme knight. What kind of power was that? Moreover, it was impossible for the great leader to be the only powerhouse in the tribal alliance. There were many leaders mixed among the Flying Dragon Knights and Bull Knights. When faced with a battle of life and death, they were more willing to fight like ordinary warriors. Moreover, these leaders had been buffed by the Great Blessing spell and the Great Prayer spell, becoming abnormally powerful. The continuous blooming of dazzling light from the battle technique was their masterpiece. Under their spears, the Minotaurs, the Longhorned Demons, and the Hellhounds were all killed. Finally, the Abyss army that was coming from the rear stopped. They had already heard the earth-shattering cries of their companions being slaughtered in front of them. The 4 great demons of the Abyss were killed one after another. Leonardo did not leave any instructions and quietly left the battlefield. This caused the Abyss army to lose a unified command. The only reason they could continue to advance was because the battlefield was too large. They did not see the scene of their commander being killed, so they did not know anything. However, seeing that the enemy had launched an all-out counterattack without giving any orders, something was not right. The first to start fleeing were the Hellhounds. These magical beasts had many transformations. When they met a rabbit, they would become as brave as a lion, but when they met a lion, they would become as timid as a rabbit. The roar was like an invisible electric wave that instantly spread across the entire battlefield. More and more Hellhounds joined the ranks of fleeing. Following this, the Longhorned Demons also felt fear. Only a few Minotaurs were still waving their spears in the air in vain, or trying to block the charge of the barbarian bulls. Naturally, the results were obvious. The Flame Gogs also wanted to escape, but unfortunately, they did not have a chance. The Wyvern Knight's charge was continuous. He dodged a spear, but when he looked up, he saw another spear coming at him. He dodged an arrow, but just as he felt a sense of relief, Dozens of arrows shot at him from all directions, turning him into a beehive in the blink of an eye. In just a short moment, over 100,000 flame gods were all devoured by the wyverns. Compared to the wyvern knight, the barbarian bull knight's progress was much slower. Of course, the great leader was an exception. At this moment, the great leader had already rushed to a place that made him feel despair. In front of and behind him, there were densely packed abyss warriors. Not to mention killing all the enemies. Just looking at them was enough to suffocate him. But now, it was useless to say anything. He could only silently swallow his tears back into his stomach and use all his strength to wave his mace. He was also silently praying in his heart. "O great God of war, if you can let me escape from this hell alive, I am willing to be your most loyal servant for the rest of my life. No, I am willing to be your most loyal servant forever." Perhaps the god of war had really heard his prayer. After an uproar, the countless abyss warriors all turned around and fled while screaming in fear. The great leader almost could not believe his eyes. Was it so effective? But he had prayed to the god of war in the past to bless him with 100 wives. Why didn't he have a single one now? Don't think so much. The great leader let out a roar and swung his mace even more vigorously. The feeling of coming back from the jaws of death and beating a drowning dog felt great. Suddenly, a dazzling saber light that seemed to be able to split the heavens and earth bloomed in front of him. Then it flashed again, and the blood mist that spurted out condensed into waves that rose 7 to 8 meters high. There were also countless mutilated limbs tumbling in the air. The great commander was greatly shocked. He couldn't help but slow down the speed of his spike club. He focused his eyes in front of him. He didn't notice that the giant armored bull under him had also slowed down. The abyss warriors in front of him all fled to the sides, as if they were hiding from something. Then, the great leader saw an open space in front of him. A young man wearing shining armor and holding a long saber was standing in the middle of the open space. Oh my! The great leader sucked in a breath of cold air. Only now did he notice that the ground was littered with countless broken corpses. It seemed an extremely fierce battle had occurred here. However, there was only one person here. Did he do all of this? Could it be that there was someone else who was as brave as him? Moreover, that person was emitting a kind of pressure that was almost tangible. The smell of blood in the air was also abnormally thick. With every step he took, the tension in his heart increased. This should also be the reason why the fleeing abyss warriors were afraid and uneasy and gave up the open space. Ahem! The great leader coughed dryly and took the initiative to introduce himself so that the other party would not misunderstand. "I am the great leader of the tribal alliance, Thorn of the South. May I ask who you are?" Hanjin did not look at the great leader. His gaze fell on the barbarian bull. He had been in this world for a long time, but he had never seen a magic beast with such dense spiritual energy. Moreover, he had a vague feeling of familiarity. The barbarian bull slowly walked towards Hanjin. The great leader felt his hair stand on end. When coming into contact with an unfamiliar powerhouse, one had to be at a safe distance. Otherwise, even if they were not enemies, they would be mistaken for enemies. Stop, that guy is very powerful. The two of us are definitely not his match. Did you fucking hear me? The great leader gnashed his teeth and whispered. The barbarian bull seemed to be very willful. It continued to walk forward, but its speed was getting slower and slower. When it was less than 10 meters away from Hanjin, the great leader could no longer suppress the nervousness in his heart. He simply jumped down and clenched his spike club tightly with both hands. He stared at Hanjin. The barbarian bull was getting closer and closer to Hanjin. 3 meters, 2 meters, 1 meter. The barbarian bull suddenly crawled on the ground. It snorted and swayed. Then, it gently placed its head on the ground in front of Hanjin. However, its head was too big. It actually blocked half of Hanjin's body. "Little guy, it's you?" Hanjin finally recognized the barbarian bull. It had already been a few years. When the barbarian bull was tired of playing, it liked to rest its head on his or Sunir's instep. Before resting, it would always snort comfortably. Although its physique was very different from the current barbarian bull, its movements were exactly the same. Moreover, he could feel the traces of the spirit beast sacrifice. The barbarian bull suddenly raised its head. Its body was very tall. Even when it was crawling on the ground, it was still as tall as Han Jin's shoulder. When it raised its head, it was actually taller than Han Jin. Then it turned around and revealed its belly. Its four sturdy hooves curled up in front of its body like a puppy. It even let out a low snort. The big leader's expression changed. Every knight in the tribal alliance had to learn how to tame beasts. They had to tame at least one barbarian bull or wyvern as their mount. He understood the barbarian bull's body language very well. The barbarian bull was covered in hard armor. It was difficult to be injured by swords and knives. Only the crease between its chest and abdomen was a fatal spot. The barbarian bull was willing to expose its most fatal spot. It was telling you that it trusted you unconditionally and without reservation. Yesterday, I had a date with a beautiful woman, so my inspiration was like a fountain. Really, I finished writing in 5 hours. It didn't even take a minute more. In the end, I played too late and slept too late. When I woke up in the morning, I had a terrible headache. I wrote for a while and then rested for a while. From 10 in the morning until now, I only finished writing 5,000 words. Compared to yesterday's efficiency, I want to cry, but have no tears. Chapter 528. Leonardo was lost in thought as he gazed at the Hell's Gate. When the battle had just broken out, he had left the battlefield as fast as he could. There was no other reason than that he had sufficient reasons to shirk responsibility. For example, he could explain that he had received an urgent message from the Hell's purple flower and had to rush back to deal with it. If he stayed near the battlefield and avoided participating in the battle, it would be inexcusable. Moreover, his brothers and sisters were obviously hostile to him. If they seized this opportunity to make a fuss, he would be in a very dangerous situation. Several abyssal demons stood beside Leonardo. Seeing that their leader's face was somewhat unsightly, they tactfully remained silent. At this time, the body of a nearby long-horned devil suddenly twitched. Under those hard muscles, something swelled and swam. Soon, more and more bulges appeared on the surface of his body, and that long-horned devil let out a painful howl. Bang! The bulge on the right cheek of the long-horned devil was the first to explode, and clouds of blood mist blossomed one after another. Strangely, the blood mist didn't scatter, but hovered in the air and condensed into a mirror. A moment later, the figure of an abyssal devil that was completely red and seemed to be burning with flames appeared in the mirror. Most of the demons had ferocious appearances, but the great demon of the abyss was different. Perhaps it was because of his age, but he gave off a kind, benevolent, and gentle feeling. Only the sharp horns on his forehead that pointed to the sky were like two long swords with a domineering aura. They carried a bit of arrogance and unruliness. Leonardo had already awoken from his contemplation. He quickly walked in front of the blood-colored round mirror and knelt down on one knee. "Father, Leonardo, Lonker still hasn't passed through the Hell's Gate?" The great demon in the mirror slowly asked. "Not yet." Leonardo simply replied, because he knew that his father liked this. "So, it's like this." The great demon in the mirror pondered for a moment, then said, "When Lonker comes out of the Hell's Gate, you tell him that his task is to destroy the Freedom Federation and the Tribal Alliance. Then wait for my order. Don't provoke the Holy Crown City, got it?" "Father, didn't you send Lonker here to eliminate that Raphael?" "How? Things have changed, haha. How should I put it?" The great demon in the mirror looked helpless. "We have overlooked a terrifying opponent. After these days of analysis, we have come to a conclusion. We have reason to believe that Raphael is a strong person from another plane." "Another dimension?" Leonardo could not help but reveal a shocked expression. "How is that possible? Father, are you joking?" "Joking? I don't have such a bad habit." The great demon in the mirror shook his head. Raphael often uses several types of magic, and there are too many aspects of it that go against the common sense of magic. Nothing in the world happens for no reason. There must be a reason that we cannot understand, and the most reasonable explanation is that he does not belong to this realm. Father, didn't Valentine say that Raphael might have inherited some kind of ancient magic? He can only deceive a kid like you. The great demon in the mirror sneered. However, at present, Valentine only wants revenge. After Dragon City and Dragon Realm are destroyed, he won't join me as promised. He will go to the Holy Crown City. Yes, the great demon in the mirror said slowly. Even he won't believe what he said. Ancient magic is also magic, and the origin of magic is to use the power of elements to change oneself, others, or the world. All the magic in the world can be divided into these three types. Leonardo, think about it. What element did Raphael use to create thousands of clones of himself, each of which has a certain fighting ability and self-healing ability? Mirror image of water magic. Before he finished his words, Leonardo had already overthrown his own speculation. Raphael's clones were definitely not the same thing as the mirror image spell. Moreover, Raphael seems to be an omnipotent master. The great demon in the mirror paused and sighed. He can save people like a priest. There was a girl named Yelena. A few years ago, she was ambushed in the forest of holy animals and was seriously injured. It was Raphael who saved her. Raphael can make all kinds of magic props, such as a long sword that can change its size at will, a rope that can automatically track and bind the enemy, and even the god of war. They were all made by Raphael himself. I haven't seen his long sword, but I have seen the rope. It seems to have a life of its own. It's really magical. Leonardo said. That's not all. The great demon in the mirror said slowly. Raphael is an excellent magician. The fireball he releases can easily pass through the obstruction of water without being extinguished. Raphael is also a powerful warrior, just like Alquite. He can use his spiritual power to fight. Raphael is also a magical puppet master. What kind of puppet is more troublesome than the life puppet? Interestingly, Raphael seems to have his own unique way of taming animals. They once went deep into the forest of holy animals and brought back hundreds of little thunderbirds, according to the observation of the purple flower. Speaking of which, I have to remind you, Leonardo, you missed an important piece of news. Me? Leonardo was stunned. Yes, you. The great demon in the mirror smiled. You thought that it was unimportant, so you didn't take it to heart. I don't blame you, but most of the time, the key to victory or defeat lies in the seemingly insignificant aspects. If you grasp them and comprehend them, you will become the victor. If you miss them or forget them, you will fall into an irreversible defeat. Therefore, you must learn how to use your brain and learn to analyze independently. Yes, Father, but I still don't understand. Leonardo stammered. Normal thunderbirds, from the time they hatch, will mature in about 1 or 2 years. Do you know what maturity means? It means that their power has reached the peak, and they have the qualifications to roam freely. The great demon in the mirror laughed. But the god of war didn't give birth to little thunderbirds, and those thunderbirds are not as calm as mature thunderbirds. They often fight with each other, which means they are still very far from maturity. Father, is this important? Leonardo was getting more and more confused. Of course. The great demon in the mirror nodded. Thunderbirds are only level 9 magical beasts. I believe if we can confront Raphael for a few years, you will see a group of mutant thunderbirds. They are very powerful, and maybe far more powerful than level 10 magical beasts. The most convincing proof is that the leading thunderbird has been highlighted. Obviously, it has received special care from Raphael. Father, even if they become top-level mutant magical beasts, what can they do? Leonardo asked. You are wrong. I'm only talking about a system. The great fiend in the mirror slowly extended a finger. An incomparably huge cultivation system that is unimaginable to us. All the abilities Raphael has are branches of that huge system. Leonardo was stunned. He stared blankly at the great demon in the mirror. He was speechless. He knew how important this judgment was. A system can't be destroyed. The great demon in the mirror slowly said, "For example, if we kill all the magicians of the human race and give them a few hundred years to recuperate, the humans will still give birth to magicians and grand magicians." Ever since the humans learned magic in the age of gods and created their own magic, magic has been completely integrated into their civilization, spreading to every corner. Notes left behind, lost scrolls, magic circles covered in dust, and all kinds of magic tools. All of these will become one revelation after another. Since the humans can create their own civilization, then we should also believe that they have the ability to replicate and recreate the glory of the past. I understand. Leonardo nodded vigorously. Such a huge system can't be hidden in some place, waiting for the lucky Raphael to discover it, and all the powerhouses of the past and present know nothing about it. Moreover, such a huge system can't be created by a single person. It requires the combined efforts of thousands of smart, witty, and tenacious powerhouses. After countless years of accumulation, only then can it be formed. The great demon in the mirror smiled. With so many powerhouses involved, then the secret is no longer a secret. We should have at least heard of it, right? But that Raphael has the ability to break through the restriction of the laws. At first, Leonardo didn't believe the great demon's judgment at all. He only thought that it was joking, but after talking for so long, his mentality had completely changed. This was the only reasonable explanation. I don't know. The great demon in the mirror shook its head. This is what Valentine and I are interested in. As we all know, only gods can be free from the restriction of the laws. No matter how Raphael came here, or whether he has the ability to go back, since he is here, at least it proves that he is hiding a secret that is enough to drive the powerhouses crazy. Becoming a god, Leonardo almost couldn't breathe, and his heart was beating wildly. Now you understand what I mean? The great demon in the mirror smiled. Tell Lonker not to provoke the Holy Crown City. It has nothing to do with winning or losing. A dead Raphael is worthless to us. After we control the other regions, how can the Holy Crown City stop us? It is said that Raphael is a person who values friendship very much. We have too many ways to deal with him. Now, we just need to be patient. Father, but Leonardo stuttered and hesitated on the surface, but his back was already drenched in cold sweat. What's wrong? The great demon in the mirror asked. What makes you so nervous? Raphael has already left the Holy Crown City. Leonardo took a deep breath. He has already arrived at Esnali City. What? The great demon in the mirror suddenly opened its eyes wide. Raphael has already arrived at the Freedom Federation. Leonardo said with difficulty. We're your brothers. Why don't I see them? The great demon in the mirror hurriedly asked. They're leading reinforcements to attack Esnali City. The great demon in the mirror had already turned into a statue. After a moment, its voice suddenly became extremely gloomy. Leonardo, don't do anything wrong. Don't let down my trust in you. Father, Leonardo knelt on the ground, his body slightly trembling. I've tried to dissuade them, but Richard won't listen to me. Father, no matter what I say, Richard just won't listen to me. I really can't do anything. Of course, Richard won't listen to you. The great demon in the mirror said gloomily. The kindness and kindness just now had all turned into a thick murderous intent. Or you deliberately made him not listen to you. Leonardo bowed deeply, almost crawling on the ground. Tears of grievance dripped down his cheeks. Father, no. You're too arrogant. Leonardo, you're too arrogant. The lips of the great demon in the mirror trembled slightly. I thought that letting you work together would ease the tension between you two. This is my fault. How could water and fire merge? Leonardo, I'll give you one last chance. Go find them and bring them back in one piece. Father, don't worry, I'll go immediately. Leonardo's face revealed a resolute expression, but his heart was cold. He discovered that his father's love for him wasn't as deep as he thought. Moreover, his father didn't believe his explanation at all. Did he really see through his scheme, or was he just angry at him? You guys keep a close eye on him. The great demon in the mirror coldly said. Leonardo was stunned for a moment, then understood that his father was instructing the demons behind him. His heart couldn't help but become even colder. It was said that if one's heart was as calm as a lake, but his face was as calm as a lake, he would be able to become a general. This saying was a bit comical. Being as calm as a lake didn't mean that one's heart was as calm as water. Could one become a general just by being able to control one's facial muscles? No matter what kind of person they were, they had their own reverse scale. Donald was able to become the leader of the Abyss world. His strength, wisdom, and strategy were imaginable. However, when he understood that his children were in great danger, he was really confused. A long time ago, Raphael, who wasn't very strong, was still able to kill the 7 Whip brothers. This news had spread throughout the demon race. What would happen now? Therefore, Donald cruelly stripped Leonardo of his disguise. Every word was harsh, and he even gave orders to the demons. If he had a few more minutes, he might have discovered his own stupidity. Leonardo was the only demon with demon talent. If Leonardo really had any thoughts of betrayal, would he be able to stop him? Even if he really wanted to deal with Leonardo, he should have told him to do his best. If something really happened, he had to ensure his own safety first. When he lured Leonardo back, he would be a fish on the chopping board. He could cut him however he wanted. The problem was that Donald didn't think so much at this moment. Everything was based on his instincts as a father. No matter what kind of life it was, there would always be a softness, a love, and a righteousness. I'll wait for your news. Donald left behind his last words. Then the mirror shattered, and the longhorn demon turned into a pile of mud and slowly collapsed. Leonardo slowly lowered his head. His eyes were filled with confusion. What should he do? In the duel, he had blinded one of Richard's eyes. There was an irreconcilable hatred between them. Richard was always against him. He thought this was a very good opportunity. Raphael dared to leave the Holy Crown City, so he must have made sufficient preparations. Also, he had received news a few days ago that the reinforcements of the Horde Alliance were approaching Esnearly City. They would arrive by today at the latest. Considering all these factors, without the Flame Tyrant Loncour, the chance of the Abyss army winning was very low. Therefore, he made the decision to kill with a borrowed knife. At that time, the blame for the failure would definitely be borne by his brothers. It would be better if 1 or 2 of them died. And because he tried his best to stop them in advance, not only was he not at fault, he was even rewarded. At this moment, Leonardo finally realized that he was too naive. The so-called perfect plan needed a prerequisite. He could still gain Donald's trust. Without trust, everything would become extremely ridiculous. Sir, an Abyss demon suddenly saw Leonardo standing still for a long time and reminded him, "You guys wait here. I'll go make some preparations," Leonardo said slowly. "Prepare? Sir, what do you want to prepare?" The Abyss demon asked. "Of course, how to save those good-for-nothings." Leonardo's tone turned cold. "But do I need to explain it to you?" Seeing that their leader was angry, the abyssal demons all lowered their heads. Among the several princes, Leonardo was the strongest and had been widely recognized. That was why Donald had appointed Leonardo to control the Purple Hellflower. It had to be known that this was the highest leader of the intelligence agency and had great authority. It could be said that he was unparalleled among the younger generation and deserved to be called number 1. Although Donald had ordered them to keep an eye on Leonardo, they didn't dare to get involved in the matter between the father and son. They turned a blind eye to it. If they really angered Leonardo, he could easily find a reason to kill them. A moment later, Leonardo appeared again. He didn't say anything and only waved his hand, releasing instant transmission. His target was Esnearly City. The abyssal devils groaned inwardly. In just a few breaths of time, Leonardo's figure had already teleported several hundred meters away. Even if they wanted to firmly carry out the order, they couldn't catch up. A few minutes after Leonardo left Hell's Gate, another longhorned demon's figure suddenly began to twitch. Following a burst of blood mist, Donald appeared again. His face had become very calm, but his lips were slightly pale. Clearly, releasing this kind of spell consecutively consumed a lot of his strength. Leonardo, on the other hand, seemed to be angry with someone. He didn't say a word and just kept using instant transmission. As for those abyssal devils, he had already thrown them more than 10 miles away. He didn't know how long he had been traveling, but when the sky started to brighten, he saw a black mass of people coming from afar. Leonardo's figure suddenly stood there, stunned, defeated. I really lost. However, the abyssal devils must be the fastest to escape, but where are they? Chapter 529. The abyssal army had retreated. Standing on the heavily damaged city wall, Kemarek was so excited that tears streamed down his cheeks. The Freedom Federation hadn't fallen in his hands. Just this point alone was enough for his name to be recorded in the annals of history, leaving behind a thick stroke of color in the history of the Freedom Federation. Honduras's face was no longer as graceful as before. At this moment, no one could hide their excitement. Yes, after this battle, Esnearly City had lost more than half of its combat power, but all the sacrifices were worth it. The abyssal army of 1,000,000 was an astonishing number, yet it had actually been beaten back. With a mere army of 200,000 that lacked high-end combat power, they had forcibly stopped the advance of the abyssal army of 1,000,000. It could be said that Esnearly City had created a miracle that no one could ignore. The entire city was in an uproar. This was an unforgettable moment for all the survivors. Countless people were running on the streets to tell each other that they had won. The common people living at the bottom were always the easiest to be satisfied. When the news of victory came, they felt that all the suffering they had suffered wasn't in vain. Even if their loved ones had died in the war, they would mourn and proudly tell others that their loved ones had done well and didn't disgrace the Freedom Federation. The people were willing to take out the food that they had saved for a long time and were reluctant to eat themselves to entertain the soldiers who had returned in triumph. The reinforcements from the tribes were also treated with the highest standard of courtesy. Even the magical beasts, such as the iron-armored bulls and the wyverns, were able to eat the delicious food that the people had carefully prepared for them. Those big shots, who were usually arrogant and never looked the common people in the eye, also uncharacteristically warmly exchanged greetings with the common people on both sides of the street. The atmosphere in Esnearly City was unprecedentedly harmonious. At this moment, it was as if there was no class distinction, no distinction between rich and poor, no distinction between men and women, old and young. Everyone was happily gathered together to celebrate this hard-won victory. In the face of death, all reliance became worthless. Only in the face of death could everyone be truly equal. This was a feeling of sharing trials and tribulations. Even the incomparably honorable Chairman Honduras had forgotten to put on his airs. Of course, whether or not he would be able to enjoy the same riches in the future was another matter. The reinforcements from the swamps were clearly frightened by this enthusiastic scene. It must be known that in the past, they had only come to the Freedom Federation for one thing: war. However, in the blink of an eye, they had suddenly transformed from enemies to heroes. This disparity was truly too great, causing these simple and honest men to feel embarrassed, but also a faint sense of pride in their hearts. Who would have the heart to refuse the friendliness of the common people of the Freedom Federation? Compared to the lively atmosphere in the city, Thorn's dejected figure in the south seemed somewhat out of place. The gigantic armored bull was currently shaking its head and acting coquettishly in front of Hanjin and Sunir, causing Sunir to chuckle. However, the armored bull's size caused the atmosphere to become indescribably strange. Just think about it. A creature that was much taller than Hanjin and Sunir was acting all silly. It was hard not to raise eyebrows. Thorn and Empyrean South watched this scene and felt their hearts bleed. What was this? Did I run thousands of miles just to deliver a pet to someone? How sad. It was really too sad. If this was spread out, they would immediately become the biggest joke in the swamps. However, the excited armored bull did not care about the feelings of its former owner. At this moment, it only had eyes for Hanjin. It was also very close to Sunir, who often fed it. Even when it saw Morrisons, it would still snort and greet them. However, it did not even look at Thorn and Empyrean South, who were sitting alone in the corner. Soon, a three-party meeting consisting of Esnerly City, Holy Crown City, and the Tribal Alliance was held. Each force sent several representatives to participate. Because this was a battlefield meeting, everything was simple. There were not even chairs, let alone casual meals. The meeting was held in the suburbs of the northern city of Esnerly City. In fact, it was just a meeting between several leaders. Honduras first came forward to say a few words of courtesy, then went straight to the point. Should they follow the Abyss army closely and end this war once and for all? In the Tribal Alliance, only the chiefs of several large tribes and the great leader participated in the meeting. Hearing Honduras' suggestion, the chiefs all looked at the great leader. No. The great leader shook his head and said, "In order to support you, we have been rushing day and night. Now we are extremely tired. In order to avoid unnecessary losses, we need to rest for a few days." On the surface, it was reasonable for him to refuse, but in his heart, he was cursing loudly. "Go to hell. I don't even have a mount. How can I fight? Ride on an old man like you?" "Yes." Hearing the great leader's words, one of the chiefs hurriedly nodded and said, "We are too tired. If it weren't for the blessings and prayers of that honorable priest, we wouldn't have won so easily." "I also don't agree with the pursuit," Hanjin said slowly. "The commander of this Abyss army was originally the fallen angel Catherine. After Catherine left, Donald sent the fire tyrant Lonker here. Perhaps the fire tyrant Lonker is on the way. My lord is right." Zhenglin said, "If we really force those Abyss warriors into a desperate situation and fight to the death with us, even if we can win in the end, we will have to pay a heavy price. With the fire tyrant Lonker, our chances of winning are not very high." This was the advantage of being a leader. No matter what he said, no matter whether he was right or wrong, he would immediately be affirmed. Thorn was supported by people in Tianan, and so was Hanjin. Zhenglin and Major Domo Gale were not just for show. Seeing that both sides were against the pursuit, Honduras was a little disappointed. The atmosphere in the room also became a little stiff. Perhaps it was because he felt unbearably hot after fighting for so long, or perhaps it was because he was disgusted by the speechless atmosphere. The great leader stretched out his hand and took off his helmet. Then he looked up at the sky and let out a long sigh. His eyes involuntarily drifted into the distance. There, his bull was playing with the beautiful female elf. How King depressing. It was fine if he didn't take off his helmet, but when he revealed his true appearance, everyone except the chiefs of the Tribal Alliance was stunned. Even Hanjin showed a look of astonishment. There was no other reason, but the great leader's appearance was very strange. It wasn't that he was ugly, but that it didn't match. At least, it didn't match his tall and sturdy figure. A pair of thick eyebrows, a pair of big eyes, and a small cherry-like mouth under the straight bridge of her nose. Not to mention, man, it was rare for a woman to have such a small mouth. It was too sexy, too charming. What the CK are you looking at? The great leader sensed everyone's gazes and immediately swore in anger. Clearly, he had experienced many similar situations in his life. "You should have grown a beard," Hanjin said with a smile. Although his words had a hint of ridicule, and it was easy to completely anger the great leader at this time, coupled with his sunny smile, it was hard to dislike him. Thorn touched his chin in Tianan, then shook his head with a bitter smile. "Our great leader is only 20 years old this year. Most of our swamp warriors mature later," a chief said softly. On the one hand, he was trying to dispel the embarrassment, and, on the other hand, he was trying to establish his prestige for the great leader. You're only 20 years old?" Honduras was stunned again. This was too young. Raphael of the Holy Crown City was already too young, And now there was another one. Had this world become the world of young people? "Are you Thorn Tianan?" Kemoratsi asked hurriedly. They were old rivals, so he certainly knew the situation of the tribal alliance. It was said that a young genius had appeared in the tribal alliance. At the age of 19, he had defeated the old chief Geofan in a fair fight and was praised as the star of hope of the tribal alliance. In the tribal alliance, people even compared him to the famous Solomon, the light of magic. Although the old chief Geofan had lost the battle to support the younger generation, and it was said that Thorn Tianan had won the battle with the help of his mount, his own strength was definitely not to be underestimated. Just now, he had been wondering why Geofan didn't appear. Since the great leader had changed, there was absolutely no one else in the tribal alliance who could convince the public except Thorn Tianan. Humph! Thorn Tianan squeezed out a snort from his nostrils, looking very arrogant. Among the representatives of the conference, he didn't care about the people of Esnerly City at all, but had been secretly observing the representatives of the Holy Crown City. That thin old man, with eyes as sharp as needles and slender fingers, should be a close combat professional. But he didn't look like a warrior or a thief. That magician in a robe, with a graceful bearing and powerful gestures, should be a person who had been in power for a long time. And, damn, that guy must be more than 100 years old, right? That's too much. He's so old and still not dead. Was he the one who released the great blessing spell, or the great prayer spell? Ahem! Thorn Tianan coughed a few times and said in a genteel manner, "Your Excellency, I've already introduced myself. My name is Raphael. This is Mr. Adolf. This is Major Domo Gale, and this is Grand Magus Zunglin." Hanjin smiled and introduced the people around him. Adolf had always been unknown, but Major Domo Gale was famous, especially Zunglin, who was regarded as the leading figures in the northern and southern magic domains together with Grand Duke Solomon. The faces of Thorn Tianan and the other patriarchs changed again and again. There was one question that couldn't be ignored. What kind of strength did Hanjin, who was surrounded by so many people, have? "You don't know yet, do you?" Kalmaratsi suddenly said. The commander of this abyss army was originally the fallen angel Catherine, but she withdrew because Lord Raphael defeated her. Hearing Kalmarazi's words, Honduras suddenly froze. Cheering for Raphael in this kind of situation meant that Kalmaratsi had already declared that the Freedom Federation was no longer the Freedom Federation of the past. At the very least, Kalmaratsi had already decided to rely on Raphael. The patriarchs of a tribal alliance had already turned pale. This news was too shocking. Thorn Tianan also opened his small mouth, and after a long time, he slowly said, "Actually, I knew you were very powerful when I first met you, but I didn't expect you to be this powerful." After saying this, Thorn Tianan gave Hanjin a thumbs up. Hanjin smiled. This guy was really straightforward, without any pretense. At this time, the god of war slowly flew over from the north, and Harley's figure appeared in the air. Seeing Hanjin's group and the people of Esnerly City gathered together and seemed to be discussing something, he didn't rashly come over. He only landed beside Sunir and whispered a few words to her, then flew back to the god of war. "Lich? How come you have a lich?" Thorn Tianan asked in astonishment. "He's just my friend, not a lich." Hanjin replied in a low voice. Thorn Tianan didn't believe him. When he was about to continue asking, he suddenly saw tall figures jumping down from the god of war, landing steadily on the ground, and slowly walking towards them in a row. It was a titan. However, the warriors from the tribal alliance had been shocked several times, and their psychological endurance had greatly increased, so they didn't find it strange at all. Dominique reached out her hand to Hanjin and said with a smile, "Sir, this is our biggest gain." For pure and plump magic crystals were lying quietly in Dominique's palm. Hanjin gently picked up the magic crystals and glanced at Sunir, who was standing in the distance with a smile. He knew that this kind of gift must have been planned by Sunir. On the one hand, it was an opportunity for the Titan to appear, and on the other hand, It meant that 4 tyrannical abyssal demons had been killed, which fully demonstrated the strength of the Holy Crown City and achieved the goal of defeating the enemy without a fight. Among the strong men in the Holy Crown City, there was no lack of wise men with foresight, especially the 5-member think tank, which was composed of Guevara, Jedis, Majordomo Gale, Gal Bin, and Glenn. Although the direction of this world war was not clear, and the outcome had not yet been decided, they were already planning for the future. As the saying goes, the former is the lesson, the latter is the teacher. The miserable experience of the 4 heroes in the First World War aroused their vigilance, and they would never let the tragedy happen again. Today's comrade in arms may be tomorrow's backstabbing enemy. Therefore, the Holy Crown City must steadily expand and consolidate its core control while resisting the invasion of the abyssal demons. They could even use the abyssal demons to eliminate the potential threats. Sunir was qualified to know the strategic planning of the Holy Crown City, so of course she would take advantage of the opportunity in front of her. Losing 4 abyssal demons, I think. Donald must be very sad. Glenn smiled. He had underestimated Donald. He was worried that the bigwigs of the tribal alliance couldn't see the origin of the magic crystals, so he explained it indirectly. Glenn's guess was also wrong. In fact, Donald was not sad, but extremely sad. My lord, Harley seems to have done something big. He has been bragging that he will give you a surprise when you return to the ship. Dominique continued with a smile. Really? Hanjin also smiled. A bright red light shot from the sky, and then Yelena and Bao Bao appeared in everyone's sight. With the increase of experience, Yelena had learned to pay attention to small details. In the past, she would have come directly to Hanjin and chatted with him regardless of what he was doing. But now, she just smiled at Hanjin from afar, and then landed beside Sunir. Bao Bao also put away the bright red flame, and curiously looked at the giant bull with his head tilted. The bull became nervous, snorting, and stepped back little by little. Sunir reached out her hand and gently stroked the bull's neck, trying to ease its tension, but it didn't seem to work. As a super-rank holy animal, Bao Bao was not even afraid of dragons, so how could he care about the warning of a bull? The more the bull snorted, the more curious Bao Bao became, and he staggered toward the bull. Finally, the bull couldn't bear the pressure and suddenly turned around, running toward Hanjin. Come on, buddy. Thorn, who was proficient in animal taming, knew that the bull was afraid of the immortal bird, so he subconsciously went up to meet it. Unexpectedly, the bull twisted its body and dodged, then quickly ran to Hanjin's side. Then it began to go crazy, constantly growling and kicking the ground with its 4 hooves, causing sparks and sand to fly everywhere. Its posture was very obvious. Come, I'll fight you for 300 rounds. To Bao Bao, this was an unbearable provocation. It suddenly let out a high-pitched cry, and bright red flames lit up from its body again. Seeing that it didn't scare the other party, the bull immediately shrank, twisted its butt, and went to Hanjin's side and simply crawled on the ground. It didn't care anymore. If the immortal bird really rushed over, he would have to deal with it. Bao Bao, don't mess around, Hanjin shouted. Bao Bao. Seeing this, Yelena hurriedly patted Bao Bao's neck, trying to calm him down. Bao Bao had extremely high intelligence, and he only wanted to scare the other party. Now that he had gained enough face and the other party had admitted defeat, he didn't want to continue arguing. He lazily retracted his flames, arrogantly glanced at the bull, and then shifted his gaze elsewhere. He was no longer interested in this kind of guy who looked fierce on the outside, but was weak on the inside. The bull's eyes narrowed into slits, leisurely swinging its tail. It didn't care about the side attack. It was only afraid of the destructive flames. Suddenly, a cry came from the sky, and little gold lightning sensed the movement below. To be precise, the bull and the thunderbirds on the god of war were not magical beasts in the traditional sense, but spirit beasts. Little gold lightning smelled the unfamiliar scent of its own kind, and then it spread its wings and flew away from the god of war. The bull's eyes suddenly opened, and its body shook. Then it suddenly stood up, and its gaze turned to the sky. Little gold lightning circled in the air a few times and finally locked onto the bull. It spread its wings and shot down diagonally, landing a few meters away from the bull. Cough! Lord Thorn. Honduras tried to pull the other party's attention back. The meeting wasn't over yet. Unfortunately, it was futile. Thorn's neck seemed to have become stiff, and he didn't have any intention of turning his head. After only a few minutes, the bird and bull became familiar with each other and began to play with each other. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.